Not long ago, we lived through a time where I think a lot of us realized how much we took our connections for granted. We did whatever we could to keep them alive, and though we were apart for so long, the lengths we went to in order to stay connected proved that, even in our most dire circumstances, we are never alone. Seeing those people in person again, being able to shake their hands again, motivated us to see the light at the end of such a long, dark tunnel, and maintaining visibility of that light is important in our darkest times. That light grows brighter the more goals we set for ourselves, the more things we find to look forward to, the more we hold on to the faint hope that things will get better, and that light will eventually reach us. Breath of the Wild was a game that shed light on how life can progress past devastation, and persist in spite of any and all circumstances. In the midst of such uncertain times, it was comforting to revisit the game as a reminder of how humanity has this miraculous ability to pick up the pieces after things fall apart. While its message was clear at the time, and it resonated with me even more so later on, its sequel was about the one thing that made living through those few years a little less difficult: connections. In particular, the ones that persist, despite the distance or obstacles that may exist between you. The game was also a major contributor to that light burning as brightly as it did, as looking forward to it was something I needed in order to keep going day after day. And when I played it for the first time, as you all might have observed back then, I felt that light had finally reached me. It was an experience I will never forget. A couple of years have passed since then. My honeymoon phase with the game has long since ended. Problems I had with the game that I chose to ignore in favor of its strengths became more prevalent as I revisited it. To some, its problems were not only more plentiful, but perhaps even pervasive, distracting, and ultimately fatal to their enjoyment of the game. At first, I thought it was just the Zelda cycle running its course. Like the seasons, each new Zelda game, particularly 3D Zelda, is the subject of heavy scrutiny. Before time passes, the next one is introduced, and people tend to prop up the previous game in light of criticism of the next one. It happens on a different scale each time. Wind Waker's response was perhaps the loudest, to the point where it was officially acknowledged by its developers when Wind Waker HD was on the horizon, and by that point, people had come around on the game. It's just that with this game, I was feeling some of the most prevalent talking points myself. People weren't just discussing these things because the game was new and different. It was because, in my opinion, Tears of the Kingdom is just as much bolstered by its predecessor's existence as it is hampered by it. I would liken mulling the game over since its release to my process of coming to enjoy Skyward Sword, except in reverse. But while recording for this video, I remembered something very important. My countless playthroughs of my favorite game, The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, may have brought its flaws to the forefront, but it was those very flaws that made me cherish it as an inspiration all the same. The point of all of this is that perspectives change with time and experience. In fact, I recently experienced this firsthand. In 2020, I filmed a video for myself to watch in 5 years, when everything had blown over, hopefully. The time to watch it just recently passed, and I was reminded of everything I felt back then. Isolation, uncertainty, and the hopes of being able to do everything I wanted to do at some point in the future. While the loneliness and anxiety I felt was certainly valid, instead I realized how much I took for granted back then. I put my heart into my work during such a bleak time period. I played a lot of great games to pass the time, and most importantly, I did everything I could to keep my connections alive while we were all apart. In a way, I felt I was closer to my friends than ever before. Reflecting on this, I realized I was never at any point truly alone. Changing perspectives are a part of life, and a reflection of growth. The constantly evolving nature of my perspectives on Zelda games, regardless of whether or not my love for them becomes stronger or erodes away with time, is a testament to the artistry, detail, and genius put into every single game in the Zelda series. And that includes Tears of the Kingdom. The fact that this video is here for you to watch is proof that I felt this game being that light at the end of the tunnel was completely valid, in spite of any criticism I may throw at it going forward. In this video, I want to deconstruct Tears of the Kingdom in 3 ways: how I've come to view it as a standalone work, as a sequel to Breath of the Wild and entry into the Zelda series, and as a forecast of what is to come for Zelda. In other words, I'll be looking at the game with perspectives informed by the past, present, and future. All three of these time periods were difficult to think about only a few years ago, just before Tears of the Kingdom released. The present was miserable, the past only made the present more unbearable, and the future seemed like it would never arrive. I would not be where I am today, and I would not have the perspectives I do today without the connections I've made. I'm Liam Triforce, and this is yet another Tears of the Kingdom retrospective. Tears of the Kingdom began development during production of Breath of the Wild's DLC. Famously, in an interview with Jason Schreier, series producer Eiji Aonuma stated that the team had way too many ideas that would fundamentally change how the game is played, so they all agreed to develop a direct sequel instead. Now, sequels in the Zelda series are not an uncommon occurrence. Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, and Twilight Princess all feature their own prominent connections to Ocarina of Time, telling stories and depicting worlds that are directly affected by the events of that game, but they stand entirely on their own in terms of identity and the ways in which you interact with their worlds. However, a direct sequel that deliberately features the same map as the previous game? That had only been done once before, but it had been done to great effect. A Link Between Worlds rewarded players for their knowledge of the previous game, often in an endearing way, while also being a brilliant game in its own right for the breathtaking and seamless merge mechanic and its novel introduction of non-linearity to the series. The item rental system managed to dictate pacing through an entirely non-linear game with an ongoing economy, encouraging you to do as much as possible to pay off your items so you can upgrade them and use them in tandem with other purchased items in dungeons. Sure, the dungeons could only focus on one item at a time, but you were still given a great deal of freedom to use those items however you liked, either in combat or in puzzles, to forge your own path through those dungeons. The game was proof that a distinct adventure across the same map could work well, and considering how long it took to build Breath of the Wild's Hyrule, as well as the scope of that game's world in terms of distinct characters, cultures, histories, and more, it made a lot of sense to implement whatever they wanted on top of what they had. Certainly the game wouldn't take as long as Breath of the Wild did, right? The gap between Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild was around 5 years and 4 months. In that time, there was an entirely new engine, a proprietary engine which would be used for many other Nintendo games, a new Hyrule, and a new sense of direction. The gap between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom? 6 years and 2 months. Despite all the groundwork being in place, building these ambitious tools, driven by the player's own creativity, ended up making the game take even longer to complete. In fact, according to an interview with Gene Park for the Washington Post, Aonuma apparently stated that by March 2022, which was the 5th anniversary of Breath of the Wild, and when the game's year-long delay was announced, the game was, quote, pretty much complete. That year was spent polishing what was already in place, so that, as Aonuma said, everything in the game was 100% to their standards. This is totally believable when you consider how well Breath of the Wild turned out from a technical perspective. Despite the freedom afforded to the player, and despite the sheer scope and detail of the game, all of its interconnected elements are intact, and interact with one another almost entirely bug-free, something that very, very few games have been able to achieve. The only technical problems were related to the game's frame rate, which was a casualty of the hardware they developed the game for. The Wii U only had 2 GB of memory after all, and much weaker components than the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. They squeezed everything they could out of that console, and even the Nintendo Switch version was a similar case. As such, delaying a game that allows players to imagine and build whatever they like solely for polishing those mechanics feels entirely believable. Anyone who has played Tears of the Kingdom will tell you that the systems in place in this game are complicated, but this doesn't even scratch the surface of what is possible. It all started with a unique effect: octoballoons. Even in Breath of the Wild, these were unique objects not only because they could lift other objects into the air, but specifically because they could stick to objects. This inspired director Hidemaru Fujibayashi to try sticking other objects together, just to see how they would function. He used cogwheels, which he stole from one of the dungeons, and attached them to a board to create a car. Then he assembled a gun barrel out of 4 stone slabs to turn his vehicle into a tank. He also created a paddle boat out of those cogwheels and wooden planks. This was what Fujibayashi presented to Aonuma when deciding on what the sequel should focus on. And from there, Ultra Hand was born. As a refresher, in my Breath of the Wild video, I described the chemistry between all elements as being the thing that dictates all interactions, both passive and player-driven. This is a sentiment echoed by the game's developers, and at GDC 2024, they used multiplicative gameplay to describe the same concept. All game objects are connected by the same world rules, which is what made it so much fun to play and solve. Ultra Hand proved to be the key for them to expand on multiplicative gameplay. While prototyping, the focus went from combining existing objects to freely sticking objects together, and as you can see here, the developers became Hyrule's own Orville and Wilbur Wright. This notion of allowing the player's imagination to be paramount in interacting with the world is inherent to Zelda, and this game would be a realization of that. The possibilities seemed limitless, though it would be difficult to execute gracefully. The responsibility fell on the shoulders of the lead physics engineer Takahiro Takayama and his team. Here is what he had to say. When I first saw the prototype, I was excited that this was going to be a great game, but I also knew this was going to be very, very difficult. I said to myself, are we really doing this? Development is going to be chaos. The more I thought, the more I worried. But in life, it's sometimes important to have the courage to push forward.
As expected, the world fell apart. At this rate, the world will destroy itself before Ganondorf comes back. And so began our battle against the true menace of Hyrule.
Remember what I said about Breath of the Wild being bug-free when compared to other open-ended games of its kind? Yeah, needless to say, this really puts things in perspective for Tears of the Kingdom. But that just goes to show how good the Zelda team is at building games. The solution to their problem was to craft a world that was entirely physics-driven. As in, no object would be driven by kinematics, but instead move based on physics calculations. To learn more, you can watch the GDC talk the team gave back in 2024. It's incredible. As a director, it is incredibly difficult to keep track of everyone's thoughts on a game of this scale, especially now that the game's complexity was expanding day by day. During Breath of the Wild's development, Fujibayashi would pause development at certain milestones so that developers could play through the game from start to finish. While doing so, developers could place signs in the game world with their feelings on certain aspects of the game, and other developers could upvote those signs. Think of it like an internal social networking infrastructure, built entirely into the game. You can actually see some of these signs in development footage that Nintendo released in interviews. To build on this idea, Tears of the Kingdom's production flow followed a similar cycle to that of Breath of the Wild. And accompanying this, the Rupee Bulletin Board system was created. While playtesting the game, developers could post their feedback in real time, give rupees to posts they agreed with, and generally help to visualize all of the data that needed to be evaluated. An image board tool, sort of like a Buru for art and images, was also created specifically to manually check fuse combinations, which totaled around 120,000. This community-driven approach to development came about because the company's typical spreadsheet tools that they'd use to manage production schedules simply weren't enough to manage a project this open-ended. and it also allowed all of the staff to express themselves in a way that they couldn't before. Researching how these games were made has only led me to believe that Hidemaro Fujibayashi isn't just in charge of directing Zelda because he understands what makes them fun. No, he remains series director because he is also great at managing people, as demonstrated through these experiments. As important as it is to be able to have a focused vision, being able to assemble a team to execute that vision and ensure that they are skilled enough to solve the problems before them, and that they are enjoying their work, is perhaps even more important. Being able to factor in the opinions of his subordinates, no matter what position they held, led to new perspectives that offered a breath of fresh air when it came to rethinking what Zelda could be. And I'm sure it made working on the game a lot more fun. Not to mention, this focus on working as a team and connecting with others would inform the game's central thesis. There is, however, one final thing to note. Throughout development, the developers experienced a strong sense of déjà vu because both games were so similar. Fujibayashi even commented that at certain points, it was difficult to differentiate the two games. They were reluctant to change certain things that would lose their appeal, and eventually relented on the idea of drastically changing how the game felt to play. The nature of this game being a direct follow-up directly conflicted with their desire to create something entirely distinct. And though they eventually settled on a direction that did feel that way, their struggles to do so would end up being visible to multiple players. It's a tall order, after all, to create a direct sequel to something as beloved as Breath of the Wild, while also creating something that is entirely unique and an evolution of their newly established Zelda formula, all within the same map as the last game. Some of the most common criticisms surrounding this game revolve around its existence as a sequel, something that just isn't in the team's nature. The team has historically never allowed themselves to be constrained by their past work, but this time, they had no choice but to work within it. Obviously, this would be no hindrance to the game's success. Like its predecessor, Tears of the Kingdom was lauded when it came out, and it was a huge success financially too. But as I'm sure you know, that doesn't tell the complete story. And I would like nothing more than to expand on everything. But let's take this one step at a time. First, we should talk about everything I think made this game so legendary in the first place. The things that left the biggest impact on me when I first played it. If you're watching this, I'll assume you understand how Breath of the Wild functioned, and I won't go into a terrible amount of detail about that because its mechanics provide the foundation for this game too. Breath of the Wild's introduction was a gorgeous accomplishment in game design, and one that would be impossible to compete with. Awakening with no knowledge of who you were and where you were asked to discover this new Hyrule through an isolated portion of the game world, one that is densely packed with organic teaching tools that inform you of what you can do throughout the entire game. It is a sampling of combat, exploration, problem-solving, and survival, all effectively conveyed through the game's interconnected elements. Tears of the Kingdom still uses that framework, but its strengths come from the sheer anticipation and wonder that surround the game itself, especially coming off of Breath of the Wild. Just as the first trailer showcased, the game begins with Link and Zelda descending beneath Hyrule Castle. The heartbeat audible in the intro, which was also present in the first trailer for the game, both renews anticipation for an adventure that many of us have been waiting for, as well as foreshadowing life underneath the castle. That anticipation only grows as you take control of Link, and you descend with Zelda further and further into the depths. The scattered, reversed vocal samples and music become more and more prominent as you grow nearer to the source of the gloom that has apparently been causing illness across Hyrule. Eventually, Link and Zelda stumble upon a mural that depicts the imprisoning war that the ancient Zonai waged against the Demon King Ganondorf. The music gets more and more intense as this revelation unfolds, until it's nice to see Zelda geek out again. One of my favorite things about this incarnation of Zelda was being able to see who she really was underneath the pressure of living up to her father's expectations and her responsibility to Hyrule. And that person she really is a giant freaking nerd when it comes to the history, culture, plants, and animals of Hyrule. She loves Hyrule more than anything, and she could really only pour her heart out about it to Link, her appointed knight. Even after all this time, Link remains by her side. He even offers to hold Zelda's torch without a word while she reaches for her Pura Pad. Keep their bond in mind, as it provides the crux for a lot of my arguments much later in this video. I feel their already established bond provides the emotional core for pretty much the entirety of this game. It's interesting to note that you actually start the game with every heart container and stamina wheel upgrade, even though it is impossible to have both at the same time in either game without glitches. I've heard that this might be because they wanted temporary heart containers and stamina to have purpose even after you've completed every shrine, which makes sense, and it's actually something that Skyward Sword let you do with its life medals, but it is just a little irritating to stare at my second row of hearts being just barely incomplete, or my third stamina wheel looking like someone took a bite out of it. I bring this up, however, because the game actually explains how Link loses everything. After approaching the source of the gloom, Link and Zelda find a withered and decayed corpse, sealed in place by a mysterious glowing arm, though it seems as though the seal has fallen apart. And you're meant to realize that the heartbeat you've been hearing belongs to Ganondorf. At least, that's how I interpreted it. The dude has such a commanding presence here, in which you can hear his bones cracking into place as he rises from his imprisonment. He's got this unsettling raspy voice, and he latches onto Link's arm, draining him of all his strength and fracturing the Master Sword into pieces when he attempts to fight back. Ganondorf raises Hyrule Castle into the sky, allowing himself to fall into the abyss below, taking Princess Zelda with him. Link's gut-wrenching gasp when he realizes he failed to save Zelda establishes that emotional crux I mentioned earlier, as well as the connection between him and the player this time around. This scene sets the stage for the entire game, not just because you want to unravel the mystery behind Zelda being transported away, but also because I just want Link to take her hand once again. That atmosphere of mystery continues into the tutorial, not unlike the Great Plateau, as you question who this voice and this arm belong to, now fused to Link's body after Ganondorf's attack, and you step out into scenery completely unfamiliar to you. And yet, as you dive into these sky islands, you can spot a dragon right away, synchronized with the music, which reminds me of how majestic they were in the previous adventure. Seeing it right away, for some reason, instilled me with hope. Then the music ramps up. This is when I began to realize that this game would be distinct. While Breath of the Wild's scattered piano conveyed a fragmented Hyrule that was beautiful in its untamed, unexplored wilderness, Tears of the Kingdom's pulse-pounding main theme sets the stage for a Hyrule that is being rebuilt. A Hyrule that has expanded through not just an upheaval, but a Hyrule expanded by its people. Life has continued on, and the world has reconnected. And hope has paved the way for everything. Regardless of what comes next, I will always respect the mystery crafted at the beginning of this game. It's exceptionally difficult to follow something like waking up on the Great Plateau, but I think this game does so in a manner wholly its own. It establishes a central theme in wanting Link to redeem himself and take Zelda's hand, a mystery in Hyrule and the Zonai, a desire to see how the world has moved on since Breath of the Wild, and how they managed to deal with the upheaval. But first, the Great Sky Island. Like the Great Plateau, you are first nudged toward a specific place, you meet a former king that uses astral projection to guide you, and lament the loss of their kingdom to you. You stand in the ruins of what was once the Temple of Time, and you obtain the abilities that directly impact how you interact with the rest of the game. This familiarity might seem to directly contrast with what I just said about how Tears of the Kingdom distinguishes itself, but the familiarity of this structure definitely grounded me in the face of the tools they introduce here. As I said in my Breath of the Wild video, the Great Plateau was a meticulously curated microcosm of the rest of the game, and the Great Sky Island is designed to be such a thing as well. Its similarities include a sort of segmented design, with each section of the island aiming to convey a piece of what the game revolves around. Not just the abilities and how they play into puzzles and combat, but also harsh weather, boss fights, Koroks, and new additions like caves, Zonai devices, and a hint at the dark depths below the surface of Hyrule. It differs a bit in practice from the Great Plateau, meaning that you'll likely be rotating around the island to hit every shrine, rather than simply going wherever you want, though you can certainly still forge your own path. And the fact that most of its landforms are floating islands means you'll have to figure out how to traverse them with your newfound tools. Indeed, the Great Sky Island exists in the shadow of the Great Plateau, and it always will. And the game knows this, which is why Link's abilities this time are so transformative. Each of these abilities not only aim to build a better Breath of the Wild in a manner of speaking, but they also paint a vivid picture of what makes Tears of the Kingdom so good at doubling down on multiplicative gameplay and player freedom. Let's start by talking about Fuse. To tell you the truth, this was the ability I was most excited about when I saw Aonuma break them all down just before the game was released. Keeping in line with the team's focus on multiplicative gameplay, objects and materials in the world could now serve a purpose in combat. This means that rather than leaving weapons in the world that serve very specific purposes, like blowing gusts of wind into the sail of your raft, or the elemental blades, for example, players can now create their own. If you'd like to have the element of wind, you can fuse a Korok frond or a huge board to your weapon to create a gust paddle. To create a flame blade, you can fuse the horn of an elemental enemy like a Lizalfos. These are just adaptations of previous applications though. If you fuse a Lizalfos tail to your weapon, it can extend as you swing it, giving you a considerable amount of range. To that end, you can fuse a long stick to another long stick to create a really long stick, poking enemies out of your reach with relative ease. You can fuse Zonai devices to your weapons too. If you fuse a beam emitter to a lance, you can essentially create a freaking rifle. Oh, and fusing things to your shield can come in handy too. If you fuse a sled to your shield, you'll create a snowboard. If you fuse a rocket to your shield, you can soar into the air instantly. And my personal favorite, if you fuse a bomb flower to your shield and you attempt to shield surf, you'll launch yourself, giving you a chance to glide wherever you like. Your arrows can be fused with materials and objects too. If you fuse an eyeball to your arrow, you can create a homing arrow that can chase down moving targets. You can create makeshift elemental arrows this way, which is something you'll find yourself doing all the time. While Fuse invites an overwhelming amount of possibilities for emergent gameplay and clever problem solving, more importantly, it fundamentally overhauls one of the most important loops in Breath of the Wild. And this is something I've thought about a lot. Here's a refresher for you. Early on in that game, you had to scavenge. You need to take whatever you can find, cook meals, steal weapons, and constantly find new ones as your old ones break in combat. This governs the entirety of Breath of the Wild's non-linear progression, complete with an invisible experience system that increases the strength of enemies and the weapons you receive as you fight more and more battles. It all comes together to create an incredible survivalist feeling that only exists in the early to midpoint of any given playthrough, because in that time, you'll still be discovering a lot of the world, and you'll still be getting better at managing and collecting your weapons. As your inventory expands with Korok seeds, you'll have more room for error and experimentation with your weapons, and having more of a selection means you can spread out your weapon usage strategically to preserve them for as long as possible. It's hard to pinpoint an exact moment where I feel this occurs, but eventually, storming enemy camps and stealing their weapons and materials is no longer a necessity, because you'll likely have an awesome selection of weapons by that point, just from being more experienced at the game. To avoid breaking your weapons on a group of enemies that don't deserve it, it's often the best course of action to actively avoid combat, and save your weapons for the big picture bad guys, like boss fights and much more threatening enemies like Lynels, where you can reap much more valuable rewards. Durability and scavenging were necessary in creating a reason to explore and discover things in Breath of the Wild, but they also came with caveats that made them much less compelling. While I am a staunch defender of the strategy that breakable weapons made you employ, and I probably always will be, the biggest casualty in having the system was without a doubt the gradual loss of that survivalist atmosphere that was present early on in the game. So with all of that said, how does Tears of the Kingdom address this problem? By doubling down through one of the most creative and meticulously developed abilities in Zelda's history. Each weapon you find in Tears of the Kingdom usually won't do you much good on its own. Familiar weapons have decayed as a result of the gloom beneath Hyrule, and basic weapons often have a pitiful attack value. You can find fully restored weapons in the depths and elsewhere, but you have to actively seek them out. Now to compensate, you can fuse materials to your weapons to create new ones. Each material or object you find here has an individual combat strength value, as do your base weapons. These materials are dropped by defeating enemies just as before, so in order to continually create new weapons, you are constantly scavenging for both useful base weapons, as well as killing strong enemies to retrieve the best fused materials you can. This renews Breath of the Wild's scavenging-centric gameplay loop that fell to the wayside by the end, because you are constantly aiming to find and create the best weapons you possibly can. Additionally, the horns and appendages that enemies sport are all designed so that they will look gnarly as hell as weapons in your arsenal, as though you are ripping these monster parts off as trophies, and they each fit the 3 weapon types nicely in their own ways. The materials aren't the only thing that play a part in fuse combinations, though. Breath of the Wild's weapon descriptions could often give you hints about a weapon's durability and other effects if need be, but they were usually reserved for flavor text. In this game, weapon descriptions are used to convey the individual modifiers that each weapon carries, and these add yet another layer to weapon strategy in this game. The improved Flurry Rush modifier is optimal when you've mastered an enemy's patterns and you know you're going to be perfectly dodging their attacks. This will tear through Lynels, for example, if you're like me and you fought them over and over again in the last game, meaning that I can steal their materials whenever I find them. Certain weapons allow you to charge attacks for far less stamina, meaning that you can perform rapid thrusts or large spin attacks with relative ease, as well as spin a claymore around for a ridiculously long time, which I like a lot. Even modifiers that made certain weapons unique in Breath of the Wild have been carried over, such as Wind Razor for creating gusts of wind and Demolisher for breaking ore deposits and rocks with ease. It's just that now you have complete freedom to fuse whatever weapons you like on top of these modifiers. Then there's the Zonite-powered weapons. These give attack bonuses not just to Zonai devices used in combat, like elemental emitters and cannons, but also pieces of constructs you've defeated. So you can use them in both ways to create whatever you like, whether it's a traditional weapon or the aforementioned beam emitter rifle. Some modifiers are more common in specific regions. The Korok weapons, for example, have fuse recycling, which means materials that burst, such as Muddle Buds and Dazzle Fruit, can be used repeatedly, meaning you can confuse, blind, and mess with enemies as much as you like without using your entire stock of materials. The Gerudo lineage of weapons allow for strong fusions at the cost of your weapon's durability, meaning that if you're okay with having some weapons be disposable, you can use them to deal unfathomable amounts of damage. Speaking of damage buffs, perhaps my favorite modifier in the game is the Water Warrior modifier, as whenever a weapon gets wet, be it from the rain or being completely submerged, the weapon will receive a ludicrous attack buff. This might seem situational at first, but keep in mind that rain was little more than an inconvenience in Breath of the Wild. Now, whenever it rains, I am powerful. Also, when Sidon's avatar joins you, you can instantly receive the Water Warrior buff whenever his ability is charged. It's amazing. Finally, there's the most interesting modifier of the bunch, Extra Durable. These weapons can last you a very, very long time if you know how to use them conservatively, or they can save you the headache of wasting weapons when mining for ore. Really, you can take advantage of this modifier in a multitude of ways. You can save your most powerful materials for these weapons in order to have your best weapons last longer through multiple fights. You can do what I like to do and make an all-reliable sort of weapon that has a decent attack value, or you can make mining tools that survive being hit against ore deposits and rocks over and over. By making specific weapons more durable, rather than increasing durability across the board, it introduces another element of strategy to creating weapons without entirely breaking the weapon system in half. Keep in mind, there are a few more modifiers that I haven't mentioned yet, but I will when the time is right. That said, each of these modifiers make weapons more meaningful discoveries in the grand scheme of things, especially in a huge non-linear sandbox like this. All of this makes the fuse system not only an ingenious method of placing creativity in the player's hands, but it also invites aesthetical potential for the weapons you create. It doubles down on the weapon system in Breath of the Wild in an unorthodox but absolutely brilliant manner, and most importantly, it innovates on a system all too common in open world games, while also making it infinitely more fun. A crafting system. There is no need to collect an assload of materials and craft a new weapon out of it, then repair it or otherwise replace it with another weapon that you've farmed materials for. No. Here you're combining a base weapon with a single material, and that's it. It's much simpler in practice, and no doubt an absolute nightmare to develop, but it revolutionizes the concept and makes it way more fun to play with due to the entertaining adverse effects materials can bring, and the awesome combinations you can come up with through modifiers. All of these things, and yet at its core, it is driven by player ingenuity. Honestly, it's my favorite of Link's abilities in this game, even including Ultra Hand, but Ultra Hand is on a whole other level, so whatever. Next, let's talk about Recall. Building on what Stasis accomplished in problem-solving and emergent gameplay in Breath of the Wild, Recall lets you rewind any object in the game world, which will then let you retrace its path. You can use this to go against the current on a floating piece of driftwood, or catch an object that has fallen off a cliff, or you can do what I love to do and raise a platform into the air for a bit, let go, and then recall it so that it becomes a floating platform. I've used it to catch my Ultra Hand creations when they go awry, I've used it to take out enemies with boulders and spiked balls, and I've used it to launch myself into the air by reversing an object that traveled at high speeds. It's like Stasis, but far more open-ended, becoming yet another example of this game's expanded focus on player freedom. Ascend was originally used as a debug tool during development, but in keeping with the seamlessness of Tears' expanded Hyrule, it was made a full-on ability. It allows you to swim up to whatever surface lies directly above you. If you're in a cave, for example, you can instantly exit the cave and emerge from atop a mountain, provided that the ceiling is low enough for you. As long as you are able to emerge and you can reach the ceiling above you, you can ascend. This is a powerful tool for gaining height, especially when paired with that floating recall platform trick I mentioned earlier, because it means you can ascend to a makeshift platform that is floating in the air in order to skip puzzles and dangerous terrain, as well as gain height in combat. That's the beautiful thing about these abilities, the way they intersect and can be used in tandem with one another just expands the possibilities for doing things in your own way, and discovering what can be done. Link's most important ability, however, is crucial to solving the rest of the Great Sky Island, and the game at large. There's not a whole lot that I need to say about Ultra Hand that hasn't already been said. The developers designed it with the intent of letting players create pretty much anything they could imagine. So it's not something I can discuss outright without first examining its progression in utility and the fostering of the player's own creative potential. Let's start small with this shrine. The implication of being able to attach nearly any object to another is massive to say the least. Therefore, the shrine starts out as simplistic as possible by having you combine two planks to create a bridge, and you can reposition that bridge however you like. What immediately struck me about this tool is just how intuitive it is to use. When centering gameplay around assembling devices and constructing things in a 3D space, intuitiveness is paramount, and the controls are easy to understand and incredibly streamlined. You can move the object toward or away from you using the D-pad, and if you hold the R button, you can use the D-pad in tandem to rotate the object either vertically or horizontally, and it can only be positioned in 8 specific positions along the X or Y axis. I couldn't imagine how awkward it would feel to hold the button down and complete a full rotation as if you were using the fizz gun in Gary's mod, but this generally allows you to be more accurate when sticking things together. To that end, the game also explicitly visualizes where you are sticking each object together via visible adhesive. Typically when building something in real life, you don't want to see the glue that keeps it together, but being able to see exactly where objects are attached to one another in this game proved to be extremely important, as it makes it easy to identify if and why your build isn't working out how you thought it would. Absolutely brilliant game design, by the way, and I've only examined the very first puzzle. Next, you'll be presented with a hook, a wooden square plank, and a set of rails that lead to the end of the shrine. If you're unsure on how these pieces fit together, you can look up to notice what the correct assembly of these parts should look like. Considering this is the first time you'll be doing something like this, I don't particularly mind them essentially showing you the solution, and in the moment, I'll never forget how amazed I was by being allowed to assemble such a simple thing. One thing I've always felt Zelda does brilliantly in achieving something new in the medium is making it feel effortless, so that when you experience it as a player, you don't really consciously notice what makes it work, you feel it. It's why Zelda has always been able to make a splash. Ocarina of Time achieved this in combat through its Z-targeting lock-on feature, and a context-sensitive action button. Seamless features that have since become staples in action-adventure games. Majora's Mask's characters all had schedules to follow throughout that 3-day cycle, but their schedules made them feel like real living people, which was especially impactful against a backdrop of impending doom. Wind Waker's art style had a lot of technical details that made it work, but what you feel is something perfectly executed and timeless, something that brings the game's world and message to life, and is evocative of art and animation a lot of us associate with childhood. Ultra Hand is one of those things that becomes second nature within moments of using it, allowing you to focus on imagining, building, and creating. It's one thing to enable such freedom, but it's another to have it be so ridiculously easy to use and so embedded into the game itself. It is a prime example of why I feel Zelda will forever be a leading force in game design. The rest of the Great Sky Island is designed around you using Ultra Hand to cross over to each floating mass of land. Whether this means assembling a staircase of floating platforms or making a raft across bodies of water too wide to swim through, or perhaps assembling a wind-propelled minecart and then getting that minecart to head upward on a hook, just as you did in that earlier shrine. There is a genuine progression in ideas here, something that continues throughout the entirety of your time with this game, even in a game this open-ended. And speaking of these fans you're seeing, these are what Ultra Hand derives most of its utility from: Zonai devices. These things enable anything beyond your wildest dreams, and each device somehow manages to fill a role in any possible build. By the time I had all of my abilities, I was perched atop a Zonai wing, with the wing slowly sliding down a set of rails. I was in disbelief over the concept of this wing actually taking flight on its own, at the mercy of the game's physics engine. The wing slid off of the rails, and to my shock, it began gliding. I had Link shift his weight over to one side of the wing, and stunning me further, Link's position was actually steering the wing, confirming my suspicions that this wing, and by extension all Zonai devices, were entirely physics-based. This was like opening Pandora's box, and need I remind you, this is just the wing itself, with no other devices attached. Zonai devices are truly the keys to the kingdom. They are the team's philosophy of multiplicative gameplay taken to the furthest extent imaginable. To illustrate what I mean, let's take the flame emitter. On its own, it shoots flames directly ahead. You can attach it to your weapons and shields to create a flamethrower, or attach it to a balloon to create a hot air balloon. You can use it to melt ice and light enemies on fire, among other things. Now let's combine it with another Zonai device, the fan. On its own, it creates a gust of wind. You can use this to lift yourself up into the air with your paraglider, or you can use it as a sort of engine for any vehicle or device you might want to make. Attach it to a wing and you've created a plane. Attach it to a sled and you've created a hovercraft. While it might seem like the flame emitter and fan have distinct purposes, as I've shown you, not a single Zonai device has to function in isolation. They all have the potential to be connected. Here I can create a windmill of fire by combining the two devices together. If I place a flame emitter on a construct head, it can target enemies that come near, and the same goes for the other emitters. You could even combine fans with time bombs to send a delayed explosion toward your enemies from a distance. You could even combine the elemental emitters and construct heads with fans to establish drone warfare in Hyrule. Yeah, remember when I said in my Breath of the Wild video that the Master Cycle was pushing it for believable science fiction in a Zelda game? That pretty much went out the window with this game. But to their credit, my suspension of disbelief is intact because of how much fun it is to use Ultra Hand. Let me pump the brakes on this for a moment though. If I were to talk about every single Zonai device and their possibilities in relation to one another here, we would be here all day. The game certainly doesn't do this all at once either. As I alluded to when mentioning Ultra Hand's progression and ideas in the Great Sky Island, the possibilities of Ultra Hand constitute this game's entire difficulty curve and sense of cohesion. Every inch of Hyrule aims to convey a new idea to you, and how you could potentially put those ideas into practice. Discovering new Zonai devices throughout Hyrule, and learning what they are capable of, in essence, make up this game's items as we knew them from the previous Zelda games. This is interesting to note because in Breath of the Wild, while your runes were incredibly versatile, you were using them in the same way to solve new problems each time. In this game, however, you are discovering entirely new items, new ways to use those items, and they can be used in and out of shrines and dungeons. All the while, you have free reign to combine those items in any way you see fit. The team doubled down on versatility and freedom, and built a game where you are always learning and always experimenting. Despite being entirely non-linear, this new focus is very much in line with Zelda games of the past, in that you gain new tools, and suddenly, the world around you presents new opportunities. But before I can go into more detail on the many ways that Tears of the Kingdom enables this, I must first conclude my discussion of the Great Sky Island. Though I've gone into how transformative Link's abilities feel this time, I've undermined the Great Sky Island multiple times as existing in the shadow of the Great Plateau, complete with a monarch lamenting his fallen kingdom, but I haven't really given it enough credit on its own, barring the new abilities Link gets. I admire it for its wistful atmosphere and distinctive visual identity. We'll talk more about how I feel regarding the continued appearances of Sky Islands throughout this video, but the impact that this place left on me, upon seeing it for the first time, is worth discussing. For the sky, the art team chose to make the foliage yellow. And to me at least, the grass and trees look as though they have been essenced by the golden light of the sun, which is fitting because there is a scene where that golden light is on full display later in the game. The Temple of Time rings out in the morning and the evening, something that Rauru reflects on. Despite the Zonai being long gone, the docile constructs that remain here continue to work diligently as if nothing has happened. Every time you visit a sky island, you are wandering through the preserved remnants of a lost civilization, lifted out of the ground and close to the heavens, where its people now reside. And I am constantly reminded of that through the music. Breath of the Wild's primary instrument was the piano. It was gorgeous in its simplicity, yet it still managed to convey a wide range of moods and atmospheres. The same instrument that melancholically painted a picture of the ruined plateau could also emulate a horse galloping through a field, or convey the feeling of being high above the ground while scaling a Sheikah tower or a snowy mountain. To symbolize the Zonai in the sky itself, composer Manaka Kataoka chose a saxophone, only it's not used in the typical manner you'd expect. Much like the piano, the sax is used to create these scattered fragments of melody that emphasize quiet moments of exploration in-game. It is a distinct enough sound from the piano, yet it never sounds quite as tragic and melancholic as the piano could in Breath of the Wild. The sax sounds elegant, mysterious, and dignified, further contributing to the aura of intrigue surrounding the Zonai. And if you wander near the Temple of Time here, the piano and sax will become intertwined, highlighting Hyrule's roots. I'll say it again. It is impossible to outdo the Great Plateau, and perhaps you could view that notion as foreshadowing of this game having a difficult time following in the footsteps of Breath of the Wild, if you really want to. But what I think is true is that this is an effective introduction to everything that makes this game distinct. The tools, the atmosphere, and the story established here made me so curious about where Zelda might be, who the Zonai were, and how I was going to be able to interact with the world using their abilities. One more thing. After clearing the 3 shrines scattered across the Great Sky Island, you'll be drawn back to the Temple of Time to receive your final ability, Recall. Link receives it by meeting with Zelda. He first approaches a stone resembling a Magatama from prehistoric Japan, a clever way to visually represent just how far back the Zonai are embedded in Hyrule's history, though its symbolism is likely lost on players outside of Japan, mainly because everyone focused on the fact that they are translated literally in the English script as Secret Stone, which sounds stupid, but that's what they're called in the Japanese script too. They are called Hiseki, which literally translates to Secret Stone. Any meaning they carry is basically drowned out in English because of their name. Either way, while Zelda is projecting herself in front of Link, she reaches for his hand and Link takes it, receiving the recall ability and foreshadowing Zelda's inherited powers of manipulating time. I always adored this moment because what you do with this ability, rewind time, is no doubt exactly what Link wanted to do when he failed to save Zelda earlier. This sequence never fails to establish a strong resolve in me to make amends with her and take her hand again, a sentiment echoed by Rauru as you open the door in the Temple of Time to the rest of Hyrule, and he leaves Zelda's fate in your hands. Upon reaching the pedestal at the edge of the broken bridge, Link leaves the Shattered Master Sword with Zelda in the past, so that it may be restored in the present. The dragon from earlier emerges from the clouds, revealing Hyrule below. All that's left to do now is to dive into Hyrule and find Princess Zelda. Let's first focus on how it feels to explore this expanded Hyrule. As I've mentioned, there is really only one precedent for crafting a Zelda game out of an existing map, but with this game's insanely versatile and meticulously crafted focus, the manner in which you interact with Hyrule feels transformative enough. One of the key components in creating this feeling lies with how shrines are built. Much like Breath of the Wild, every region has shrines that build on the concepts that the central dungeon of that region will focus on. Only this time, shrines often convey ideas that you can use in your various Ultra Hand builds, or fuse combinations, as well as new applications for Recall and Ascend, which prove to be just as flexible as the other abilities. Shrines contain universally applicable knowledge. They are puzzles that are tutorials without you knowing it, which I think inherently makes them more satisfying to discover on an initial playthrough, when you don't have any of this knowledge at your disposal. Other times, shrines can be tests with abstract concepts, and all the while, the malleable nature of your abilities means they can be solved in multiple ways when you think outside of the box. Shrines in this game are once again a representation of the team doubling down in a fascinating way. Now, in order to make it so that shrines still have you be resourceful and to make you think on your toes, you cannot use any of the Zonai devices that are in your inventory when inside of a shrine. You can fuse devices to your shield before you go in there, and you can use all of the materials you have in your inventory, but you can't build an air bike or a drone unless the shrine has all of the devices you'd need to do so. Also, I haven't mentioned this yet, but you can't separate Zonai devices from your weapons and shields without destroying them in the process, so you can't cheat like that either. You can separate devices and materials from weapons in Terrytown though, which is pretty cool if you've fused a gem to a scepter, and you suddenly want to sell it for rupees. To go on another tangent, your contraptions won't drain any energy when activated in shrines, compensating for the fact that you aren't allowed to break shrines in half with all of your devices. You can think of this energy meter like the equivalent of Link's magic meter in previous games, and you can upgrade your energy wells by obtaining crystallized charges. More on how to do that soon. Expanding this proves to be essential in creating more elaborate things with Ultra Hand. With more energy, you can craft a plane that can fly virtually anywhere through the sky, or a battleship for attacking in the air, or a combat vehicle, or whatever you like. More importantly, more energy allows you to cover far more ground with your contraptions and solve problems in extravagant ways, which is something I very much did. You can even overcharge your energy with a large Zonai charge for a brief period, giving you infinite energy until it runs out, as well as gain temporary energy with regular Zonai charges. The reason I lay all of this out is because the team knew it was important to have a sense of progression in your Ultra Hand builds, not just through the gradual doling out of information through shrines, but also through tangible growth by having you expand your energy wells, which feeds into one of the many new loops in Tears of the Kingdom. To some extent, you are not immediately capable of everything upon starting the game, at least not on a first playthrough. You have to earn that right by exploring and learning. Let's talk about what you can learn from finding shrines. Starting in Hyrule Field and its immediate vicinity, shrines often focus on being both introductions to some of the Zonai devices you'll be frequently using, as well as plenty of strange tests. A fixed device, for example, is smack dab in the middle of Hyrule Field, and it is one of the most open-ended and trickiest shrines in the entire game. It was no doubt deliberately placed here, just so that players could learn to experiment with everything. The primary device in this shrine is this spike that can disappear into any surface while maintaining its position. The goal is to somehow send the ball with enough force at this target so that the door will open, but there's a treasure chest waiting for you if you can somehow whip the ball over to the right side without a ramp. It almost feels like you're in a batting cage when you set up the poles to swing at the ball, except the pitch is being thrown very slowly. As you can see, I did this without even using the spike by some miracle of timing and alignment, but you can position it in such a way that it redirects the ball toward the ramp. I think that was the intended solution, but that is a testament to the open-endedness of this shrine. These are not isolated occurrences. This open-ended problem solving is possible throughout plenty of this game's shrines. Forward Force, for example, aims to teach you how you can use wheels not just to create vehicles, but also to rotate objects, as demonstrated by the intended solution to this part of the shrine. However, I did not pick up on this. Instead, I thought about combining my abilities just as one might combine their items in a previous Zelda game, as demonstrated by my fondness for killing floor masters in Wind Waker with an ice arrow and the skull hammer, and my floating recall platform trick I showed off earlier. The chemistry between all things is always on my mind in Zelda, especially these games, and I instead attached the ball to a plank, created some scaffolding that would balance it out and be just within my reach, and I managed to rest it so that I could grab the ball and move on. On my most recent playthrough, I dragged the ball up to the platform, climbed up the ladder, and then used recall to bring the ball to me. Both of these solutions skip the central mechanic of the shrine, but are a testament to just how wonderful this kind of open-ended problem solving can be, and how well implemented it is. The final portion of this shrine asks you to make a paddle boat to get the ball to the goal, but I instead decided to position a raft with wheels on top of these walls here. And you know what? It worked. Kind of. It fell over at one point, but I made it far enough that I could use Ultra Hand to correct my mistake. If you visit a walkthrough or watch videos on shrines that have comments on them, you'll find that a lot of players found their own goofy solutions to many of these shrines, which makes each playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom feel entirely personal. For example, I solved Built for Rails using my mastery of recall and a well-timed shield surf. The shrine has you fix the platforms in such a way that they can travel and swap sets of rails without falling over, and while figuring out how to do this, I saved myself with recall in a peculiar way. Then, once I had finally crafted something workable, I decided I didn't want to wait and just glided and grinded my way to the goal. This made me realize that I could have likely made a hovercraft using the fans available to me, skipping the rails entirely. In well-timed cuts, I abused recall and the momentum created from the ropes in order to easily pluck the objects I needed out of the air. Now that I've shown you some of my unorthodox thinking with recall, I should say I didn't just come up with it on the fly. I feel I learned to do this from the shrine Rise and Fall. Located just northeast of Hyrule Castle, this shrine teaches you that you can retrace the path of launched objects in order to use them as floating platforms, and as vehicles that can bring you toward your objective. This is not only an example of how shrines can be simultaneous tutorials and intelligent puzzles, but they could also somewhat solve an issue I had with Breath of the Wild shrines. A lot of those shrines could often end before the concepts introduced have a chance to truly flourish, but in this game, even when the shrines are mere nuggets of full ideas, they still convey concepts that you feel compelled to take with you into the rest of the game. Rise and Fall might be short, but I genuinely think it had a profound impact on how I would solve problems across the entire game. Another example of this impact can be observed in an uplifting device, also found in Hyrule Field, next to New Seren's stable. It teaches you about hot air balloons by having you build one and ascend directly upward. Then you have to somehow bring this giant ball with you, despite its weight, subtly teaching you that more heat, or wind for that matter, can counteract a large amount of weight. I chose to solve this by lifting myself and the ball with separate balloons. The knowledge I collected from this shrine helped me to approach one of this game's 4 regional phenomena, specifically the one happening to the Gerudo region. In Breath of the Wild, just trekking through the desert, beating the heat, and disguising as a beautiful woman was engaging enough, but the expanded potential for traveling in this game would have made the desert trivial on its own. So they decided to fill most of the desert with a harsh sandstorm, which disables your map and makes it generally difficult to reach Gerudo Town. There are many ways to brave the storm, like walking straight through it like a badass if you somehow know where to go, using updrafts to glide over it. You can find caves and chasms to travel under it, or you could fly over it with a makeshift plane. It doesn't matter, so long as it fits your playstyle and what you are capable of at that moment in your playthrough. As for me, I didn't really have the means to build something that could fly horizontally over the storm, nor could I warp to the sky and dive down or glide over it entirely, so I built a hot air balloon stuffed with fire to give myself some verticality. I flew as high as I could over the storm, shifting my weight so that it would fly forward ever so slightly, and once I felt I had enough height, I jumped off and glided straight into the town. I would also use these souped-up hot air balloons to reach the pieces of the Lome Labyrinth that float in the sky, which always require you to ascend directly upward by any means necessary, as well as to reach dragons and sky islands where I otherwise wouldn't be able to gain height in an instant. The extra power of the flame emitters meant that I'd be gaining a lot of height relatively quickly, and it was quite satisfying to do so. The only problem is you have no horizontal control here, so I'd always have to adjust my trajectory, with the risk of stranding myself on a piece of geometry always present. It makes for some incredibly dynamic problem solving, and it created funny moments of panic and improvisation that I will never forget. I could go on about what these shrines teach me. A sliding device taught me an easy way to navigate the shifting sands of the Gerudo Desert. More Than Defense taught me the practical applications of fused Zonai devices. Jailbreak taught me how powerful Ascend can be once there is a path for it. Well-Timed Bounce taught me the potential for launching myself with a recall, as well as the underlying power of physics throughout all problem solving in this game, something that I immediately applied to the shrine Deep Force, which itself introduces yet another usage for the physics engine, dunking objects underwater so that when you let go of them they shoot back up. Physics underlie any and all interactions in this game, and nowhere is that more evident than in the Shrine Wheeled Wonders. While assembling these vehicles is what the shrine revolves around, I want to focus on this particular solution at the very beginning of the shrine. You attach the assembled device to this bridge, and as it rolls through the lava, the bridge unfolds to create a path for you. The fact that this interaction even functions is a technical marvel. I cannot stress this enough. You are witnessing something that would make even the people that worked on Half-Life 2 shiver in fear, another much earlier game to allow the player full control over the physics engine. The final puzzle is also pretty awesome, and it too is driven by physics. You can either push these balls onto the switch by funneling them in like I did, or you could stick all the balls together and wave the switch down. Every puzzle I've discussed is driven by physics and the chemistry between every single element in this game, and they demonstrate the team's mastery of multiplicative gameplay. Even if the shrine in question is just meant to be a straightforward test of your knowledge, they can still be remarkable examples of just how flexible this game can be through both your abilities and the Zonai devices. Now, because shrines are your primary discoveries in this game, constituting the expansion of your heart containers and stamina wheel, it's worth talking about how you discover them, especially when the game utilizes the same map as before. In discussing that, we will delve into the many things in place that keep exploration of the same Hyrule fresh. While shrines can still be scattered across Hyrule in the open air, a lot of them are hidden in the expanded portions of Hyrule, including caves. As introduced in the Great Sky Island, caves contain ore, like-likes, horriblins, and bubble gems for you to collect, which can be used to redeem rewards through Colton. The general flow of caves remains the same each time, but oftentimes, how you explore them can feel unique, especially when they are tied to quests and shrines, and you can find special treasure like armor, Misko's treasure, Leviathan bones. Really, caves are an integral part of your exploration in pretty much every way. In one cave, you might need to use a shrine crystal as a beacon to reveal the shrine, while also using Ultra Hand to create a path somehow. In another, you could be using it to ascend into a Skyview tower, or perhaps diving deep into it to find a sexy backless dress for Link, complete with the new cold weather attack buff. Maybe you'll be solving the riddles pertaining to Misko's treasure through clever thinking, or in my case, brute force. Whatever the reason, these caves carry the atmosphere of one of my favorite elements of a Zelda game. In each Zelda, caves always contain the unknown. You never quite know what you'll find in them. In Wind Waker in particular, the exterior of an island might not even come close to reflecting the challenges that await inside of the island's caves or grottos. They always have these isolated puzzles that you'd never see coming, and rewards that you can only imagine. Although you could view shrines as replacements for these grottos, you always knew you were going to get a spirit orb or blessing, so they didn't truly count. Few as they may have been in Breath of the Wild, when caves were implemented, getting into them was a lot of fun. And now you're telling me that caves are a central mechanic to this game? I was ecstatic. Though caves often look alike, or at least blend in with the region they feature in, there are multiple caves that feel entirely distinct. The cave that runs from Lookout Landing to Hyrule Castle, for example, has you excavating for the soldier's armor, while there are caves you can find in quicksand out in the Gerudo Desert. There's also a cave under Gerudo Town that has you connecting paths of light through mirrors to unearth treasure, the ancient Zora waterworks in Zora's Domain, and the former Shrine of Resurrection location even contains a schema stone for your auto-build ability. Right, I'm getting ahead of myself. In addition to the sky and the surface, there exists an additional third layer to Hyrule, known simply as the Depths. This layer is intertwined with the other two in crucial ways. For one thing, it contains Zonite for you to mine all over the place, a material that can be used to purchase crystallized charges for energy wells, as well as to summon Zonai devices as part of your builds without actually having them in your inventory. There are several ore deposits, enemy camps, and full-on mines where you can obtain Zonite, but you can also discover the previously Amiibo exclusive armor sets and weapons scattered throughout, as well as new armor sets like the Depths and Minor sets. In the sky, you can solve puzzles and explore to find old maps that point to the location of these armor pieces and weapons in the depths, further solidifying the connection between all three layers. There are even unique bosses to be found down here, coliseums to do battle in, as well as rematches with the dungeon bosses for incredibly strong fuse objects, if you can believe it. That's just scratching the surface though. These are light roots. They illuminate a small fraction of the pitch dark depths. Without them, you'd be throwing bright bloom seeds at everything, or fixing lights to your vehicles in order to navigate clearly. It's important to note that there aren't any shrines in the depths, but at some point you might come to realize, either on your own or through a clue from the game, that the light roots are synchronized with shrines on the surface. In an ingenious feat of layered design, light roots can reveal the location of shrines on the surface and vice versa. This, coupled with the fact that bodies of water are replaced with impassable walls in the depths, designate this layer as a sort of dark world parallel to the surface, just like A Link to the Past, and they use this to great effect. There are often moments when exploring the connections between the surface and the depths where you'll have to find isolated chasms in order to reach certain areas below water, and navigate special paths just to reach certain portions of the depths, where treasure, boss fights, or even secret areas above the surface can await. Case in point, let's look at the Lost Woods. In this game, you can't even navigate it and solve it like you would in Breath of the Wild, due to an overwhelming smog that engulfs the area. Even the Great Fairy nearby is impacted by it. You also can't dive in directly from the sky, so your only route left to explore is in the depths. You need to trace a path using your map while exploring from the depths, and only then will you find a place to ascend directly into Korok Forest, upon which you'll discover that all of the Koroks in the Deku Tree are apathetic and motionless from the gloom that poisons the area. You can dive into a hollow pit inside of the Deku Tree to find them. Right, so a bit of a tangent. Carrying on from the ways Guardians could horrify players in Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom introduces these grabby little floor masters, known in this game as Gloom Spawn. They don't drag you away like in previous games, but instead poison you with gloom. However, once you manage to defeat them all through sheer resilience and a bit of creativity for managing multiple targets, you'll be fighting Phantom Ganon. Believe it or not, these guys are like echoes of the final boss. Rather than being distinct enemies, as was the case in Wind Waker, for example, they instead act as samplings of the final fight with Ganondorf, and that is exhilarating as it is terrifying. Even so, they are worth fighting, as they drop unique weapons such as the Gloom Sword, which boasts a high base attack value but gradually inflicts gloom on you, as well as the Demon King's Bow, which gets stronger as you obtain more heart containers. Anyway, defeating Phantom Ganon here completes the Scourge of the Deku Tree quest, dissipating the gloom that holds Korok Forest in place, and allowing you to speak with the Deku Tree and complete the other quests around the Lost Woods. Oh, and the Master Sword? It's not here. We gave it to Princess Zelda, remember? We'll talk about that eventually. This quest in Korok Forest is just one example of how the depths can synchronize with the surface for a cool quest. I could mention several more at the risk of droning on, but there's also the quest revolving around the continued misadventures of Master Koga. Pursuing this quest to its end means finding multiple chasms scattered all throughout Hyrule, but it grants you new knowledge and possibilities just as shrines do. To initiate this quest, you can help Josha and Rabi with their research of the depths and reach the great abandoned central mine, where you'll run into Master Koga. Every time you fight him, he'll be using some new vehicle he has constructed, directly demonstrating a potential new build that you can use to explore, or use as a weapon in vehicular combat. All the while, you can use Zonai devices to gain the upper hand and counter his creations. When you defeat Koga for the first time, you'll obtain Auto Build, which allows you to save and remember previous builds for quick usage, assemble pre-existing builds through schema stones you can collect from constructs across Hyrule and its multiple layers, and as mentioned, you can build things with Zonite if you don't have the necessary devices to assemble it. That said, if the devices are nearby, Auto Build will automatically and intuitively assemble your creation effortlessly. It's a powerful feature, and what I appreciate most about it is the fact that it accommodates players that aren't necessarily the most imaginative with Ultra Hand. The mechanic enables practically boundless creative potential, with the only hard limits being your imagination, and the attach limit. To some, these possibilities come naturally, but others might find this focus on building and creating things overwhelming. This is why I singled out shrines for being so brilliant as lessons that double as puzzles, because they gradually expand a player's thinking in the same way that dungeons expand the player's arsenal in previous games. Auto-build, Schema Stones, and the Master Koga quest take that a step further, and I love it. Another quest related to the depths sheds light on how certain areas from Breath of the Wild have been repurposed in memorable ways, something that is especially important when you want your memory of the previous game to be rewarded somehow. Here's one of my favorite examples. Revisiting the Great Plateau is nostalgic and everything, and you can explore the excavated Shrine of Resurrection, visit a Yiga clan base, and find treasure using your newfound Zonai abilities, but what I want to focus on is the quest known as A Call from the Depths. The goddess statue here will tell you that it is trapped under the water behind the stone gate of the plateau, which asks you to investigate the surrounding perimeter for a place to drain the water. Once you've done so, you'll find a bargainer statue, just like the one Josha has at Lookout Landing, which you can trade Poe's souls found in the depths for items and armor, like the Dark Tunic. This one, however, asks you to head to the Temple of Time to speak with the goddess statue again, and it will ask you to retrieve its stolen eyes. Its eyes are located in the exact locations of the 4 shrines from the previous game, meaning that you now have to scale mountains and accommodate for conditions as you would before, only you now have entirely new abilities to do so in empowering ways. And you have to navigate the depths with vehicles and whatnot, so that this giant bargainer statue can be reassembled. Your reward for doing all of this, believe it or not, is a heart container or stamina vessel, just as you would have obtained from collecting the 4 spirit orbs in the previous game. You can also purchase the Tunic of the Depths from this statue with Poe's souls. Such a fun way to use that familiar map in a new and exciting context. That's the big thing about all of these new ways to explore Hyrule, and how revisiting Hyrule manages to feel fresh a lot of the time. From the caves to the sky islands in the depths, these things do not exist in isolation from the surface of Hyrule. They are all connected. Reaching certain parts of the surface could mean diving in from the sky, or ascending from the depths. Reaching parts of the sky could mean surveying from the surface and building up to it, or launching from a Skyview tower. And as I outlined earlier, depth exploration depends on your knowledge and exploration of the surface. This philosophy is an extension of the chemistry between all elements in this game, multiplicative gameplay at its finest. And when talking about connections, you can't go without mentioning this game's regional phenomena. Perhaps the most obvious example of how familiar areas have been repurposed is through the regional phenomena quests, and their accompanying dungeons. These present the most cohesion consistently, and are surprisingly transformative explorations of towns and regions you might already think you know well. The gradual build-up in mechanics and atmosphere toward the dungeons themselves are a core part of the experience. I won't lie to you, I don't love everything about the dungeons, and we'll talk about that in due time. But I'd be lying if I said they didn't feel far more cohesive and fully fleshed out than the Divine Beasts, with everything you learn across each region building up to how you eventually solve them. And because the fact that the bosses are actually distinct ideas that play into all of those concepts, unlike the Blights for the most part. In Eldin, you'll quickly notice that the Gorons seem to be hypnotized by this mysterious marbled rock roast, including Yunobo, who leads the Yunobo-ko mining company with an iron fist. He certainly seems to be less cowardly, to the point where you'll be fighting him as he carries the subtitle, "Clearly Not Himself." It's here where you'll inadvertently learn about his ability to roll ahead at high speeds, and he can even attach himself to your vehicles, regardless of whether you're on the ground or you've taken flight, acting as a cannon. This comes into play as you run into Moragia atop Death Mountain, and it becomes crucial to launch Yunobo like this in the region's dungeon. When it comes to the Sage's special abilities, both you and your buddy need to be present in order to release the locks in dungeons, honing in on this game's theme of connecting and cooperation. This ability is awesome, and I consistently regret not going for it first more often. Not only is it a great tactic for taking on multiple enemies, but Yunobo will smash through rocks and ore deposits effortlessly, something that we've established that you'll be doing a lot in this game. Plus, he makes for a great cannon when you're flying around. More important to this region's cohesion, however, are the shrines and challenges that set up the dungeon itself. There are constant minecart tracks that will take you all over Eldin, and even through certain caves, which is pretty fun, as well as shrines like Against the Flow, for example, which has you creating a path with the Hydrant Zonai device across lava, something that comes into play not just in reaching the dungeon in the lava-filled depths beneath Death Mountain, but also in creating a ramp for Yunobo to hit a gong in one of the puzzles. Using recall in this shrine can help you retrace the path of the platforms you've created and send you straight to your destination, but you can also place a fan on these platforms, further demonstrating the interconnectedness of the systems in this game and how they contribute to multiple solutions. All of this comes to a head in the Fire Temple, a massive dungeon with 5 floors and several minecart tracks connecting its various puzzles, with each puzzle testing you on what you've learned throughout the region. All dungeons and tiers of the kingdom are once again structured like the Divine Beasts, wherein you have a handful of disconnected puzzles to solve rather than an interconnected puzzle box, but the quests and shrines you complete throughout each region all build toward the focus of the dungeon itself, and your path through these dungeons can be far more non-linear due to the nature of the game's central mechanic. Like Fuse's impact on durability, the focus on complete freedom, and the design of shrines this time, dungeons double down on Breath of the Wild's focus. Rather than reverting to the design of previous games, the team instead decided to explore the potential of this non-linear structure through the versatile game they had built. That said, the theming this time around is much stronger. You might not have the weight of the champions dying on your mind as you explore these colossal beasts, but instead, you have temples that reflect everything you've learned, temples that echo through history as legend in each region, until you unearth them yourself and prove that they are real. The Fire Temple in particular has an incredibly imposing atmosphere that gradually becomes more triumphant and represents the Gorons in its music, and I was initially floored by its interconnected minecarts that the player can use for travel, as well as the freedom at play in it. I do think you are given a bit too much freedom, but it almost feels like they wanted you to try to fly around with Yunobo and break this dungeon in half. We'll talk more about the notion of having too much freedom soon, but on my first playthrough, the Fire Temple was a significant improvement on what a non-linear Zelda dungeon could be. Speaking of which, let's look at the Gerudo quest next. I've already mentioned the sandstorm engulfing the region, but once you actually reach Gerudo Town, you'll quickly notice that the place is in ruin, and the always terrifying Gibdo, are roaming the streets. At first the town seems deserted, but then you'll realize that everyone has gathered into an emergency shelter underneath the palace, and naturally, Vo aren't allowed in. You'll have to sneak in through a secret entrance in the palace, hidden under a statue of a sand seal. Buliara vouches for you though, so you can stick around and examine how the Gerudo have been able to get by. Vo and U classes are seemingly important enough for there to be a classroom in the shelter, there is a prison where trespassing Vo reside, there are still shops to browse, there are quests to solve, like the Mystery of the Seven Heroines, and there is a connecting cave with mirror puzzles, a mechanic that features heavily throughout the region and its dungeon. In order to reveal the Lightning Temple in the first place, you have to reposition giant mirrors in the sandstorm so that they form a triangle, expanding on the traversal methods you might have taken to even reach Gerudo Town in the first place. Reflecting light off of mirrors is a common mechanic in past Zelda games, but this one allows you to freely position mirrors in any way you like thanks to Ultra Hand, greatly expanding the potential for puzzle design. You can still fuse a makeshift mirror shield in order to stun enemies with blinding light though, which is pretty cool. Before I talk about the dungeon though, I should talk about one of my favorite portions of this quest, defending both Karakara Bazaar and Gerudo Town from an onslaught of Gibdo. Once you reunite with Riju, you'll gain access to her special ability. To say that she has learned to harness the power of lightning would be an understatement. Riju even cut her hair short, a symbol of her growth, and much like Zelda, settling further into who she is this time around. Once you ask her for help, a circle of lightning will gradually expand, and you can call down lightning on a specific point by firing an arrow within that circle. It's similar to Urbosa's Fury, but it grants you far more range and it plays into the game's theme of cooperation. You'll be using this to reliably deal damage to Gibdo, due to their disturbingly tough exteriors not reacting to standard attacks, as well as to demolish their hives. This is what makes Gibdo so much fun to deal with in this game, especially when they are traveling in a pack. Defending Gerudo Town is another story entirely. Hives sprout up and surround the whole town, and you have the freedom to position soldiers and debris wherever you feel would be best, and then once the invasion takes place, you can fend off the Gibdo however you see fit. You can run back and forth while letting soldiers take care of specific entrances, use Ultra Hand contraptions to fire at them while you manage other entrances. It's a lot of fun even in its brevity. And before entering the temple, you'll be attacked by Queen Gibdo, giving you a taste of the dungeon boss before you've even begun. A subversion of expectations that feels like a checkup on how well you've been able to work together with Riju. With that said, the real highlight of this entire quest is the Lightning Temple itself. As far as I'm concerned, its interconnectedness is a fantastic example of what non-linear dungeon design can be, and I personally think it serves as a blueprint for what this kind of dungeon design could look like in future Zelda games, provided that they continue down this path. The path is straightforward at first, but it quickly conveys traps and secret paths behind walls before branching off, and these secret paths and traps are not obvious until you use Ultra Hand, due to how dark it is inside the temple. Soon enough, you'll be introduced to the paths of light that this dungeon revolves around, leading you into the central hub, where you'll have to create several paths of light all around the various rooms of the dungeon. This vertical hub, known as the Room of Ascension, connects to each floor and will have you shifting mirrors around, linking light together so that you can open new paths. Your exploration through the dungeon, no matter how you decide to approach it, entirely depends on your ability to connect rays of light in the center. It links everything together and does away with the feeling of these rooms being shrines that they stitched together that the Divine Beasts established, and instead creates a non-linear yet interconnected labyrinth, and it feels amazing to solve. Also, thanks to the puzzle rooms being quite claustrophobic, climbing around does not break the dungeon in half. Something that would have otherwise made exploration trivial has instead allowed you to survey the dungeon from any angle you like. On top of that, it just feels mysterious to explore this place thanks to the tricks and traps all around, and the dim lighting. This is everything a redefined, non-linear Zelda dungeon should be, complete with a culmination of everything the region has taught you, as demonstrated by the intense fight with Queen Gibdo and her offspring. And funnily enough, it's not really all that focused on player freedom. It's actually more beneficial to solve it in the methods they've conveyed to you, which only contributes to my love for it. This might foreshadow something I'm going to be talking about in the next chapter. Maybe. Next, we'll briefly mention the Zora quest in Lanayru. The once pristine, clear waters of Zora's domain have been filled with a gross sludge, once again turning the traversal of a region on its head, and it is driven by the mystery of where King Dorephan has disappeared to. There are a few ways you can deal with this sludge as you unravel this mystery, but it made me realize just how much I took swimming up waterfalls with the Zora armor for granted. Also, the shrines in this region expand upon how you can manipulate water to your advantage through the physics engine, something that becomes paramount in the dungeon. Your quest will lead you to a floating fish-shaped island through a riddle, and that riddle points to a perspective puzzle that I adored. You'll also head through the ancient Zora Waterworks, a majestic underwater cave system that has you gradually rise to a platform that opens the way to the Water Temple. The path up to the temple reveals just how much your adventures toward the dungeon make up a significant part of what we can consider dungeons in this game. It's not just about the temples themselves, it's about everything you learn and everything you do leading up to them as well, as you can take notice of in the path to the Water Temple, where you have a great deal of freedom to approach its platforms and problems however you see fit, based on what you know about the game. As for the Water Temple itself, though, we'll talk about it later. Finally, we'll discuss what I firmly believe is my favorite regional phenomenon in this game. Remember, I'm not simply talking about the dungeon here. What makes this next one great is everything feel like it connects perfectly. The game encourages you to go visit the Rito first, but of course, you can once again do these quests in any order. Even so, on my first playthrough, I visited the Rito first. The others can be great, but this quest is of such personal importance to me, I can't help but feel the way I do. The focus here is that Rito Village has frozen over, something that you might already have experience in dealing with as ice as a mechanic is conveyed to you in the Great Sky Island. And the central bridge is out, leaving it as a lone peninsula that can only be accessed through flight, an ability innate to the Rito, and this proves to be the crux of this entire quest. You, a mere Hylian, have to learn to fly. As you'd expect, you can reach the village in a number of ways. You can hover over, you can launch yourself, it doesn't matter so long as you find something that works. Upon arriving, Rito Village's present state really got to me. The snowfall is so thick that you can barely see beyond the village, the entire village is covered in deep snow, and the once magnificent spire that resembled a bird perched atop the village has been entirely encased in ice. But what struck me most of all was the music. You know me, I talk about Wind Waker all the time on this channel. I love the game more than I love myself. Visiting Rito Village in Breath of the Wild made me feel like I was coming home to roost. Naturally, you can imagine the intense emotions I felt when I gazed upon that frozen spire and listened to an eerily peaceful yet disconcerting rendition of Rito Village's main theme. Or in my case, Dragon Roost Island's theme. Fittingly, it sounds like every comforting memory I have with the place, frozen in time. It sounds like a wistful, melancholic reflection on a time I can never return to. This would not be the only time, however, that I would feel a lump in my throat while going through this quest. Many of the Rito here are clinging to the Song of the Stormwind arc as a prophecy that should somehow save the Rito from their plight, as it did long ago. And the song makes mention of a flying ship. Oh boy. It's no secret that I love the ghost ship quest in Wind Waker, so much so that I mentioned it at the beginning of my Breath of the Wild video as a firm representation of what I love most in The Legend of Zelda. To chase down another ship, a mythical flying ship that may or may not be real, got me immensely excited and reminded me of how I felt chasing down the ghost ship many years ago. In order to progress further in this quest, you'll first have to meet up with Teba and his son Tulin, the very same Tulin that had a goofy, bulbous head in the first game. Tulin is one of the 4 sages you'll be cooperating with throughout the 4 regional phenomena, except that Tulin takes the place of Teba, who was the descendant of the champion Revali in Breath of the Wild. While some might question why he was sidelined, Teba had already settled down in that game. He got married and had a kid, whereas the others were still trying to find themselves and become great leaders. When Riju lost her mother, she had to take up the helm as chief of the Gerudo almost immediately, despite being young and despite being scared of lightning, the very element she is supposed to wield. Despite Daruk being a symbol of bravery, Yunobo was cowardly and he regrets being the way that he is. Sidon has mourned his sister Mipha ever since her death, but attempts to maintain a positive attitude and display kindness to everyone he meets just as she did. Teba, however, has had his family and his legacy on his mind, resolving to take Tulin to the flight range as soon as he recovers from his injuries at the hands of Divine Beast Va Meadow. As you might expect, Tulin has become a skilled archer since then, but he has reached an age where he relentlessly desires independence from his parents, flying off on his own despite his father's words of warning. In doing so, he loses his bow, and he has to work together with Link to get it back, where he quickly learns that he will never mature if he can't cooperate with others. Cooperation is a crucial theme across all 4 dungeons, as we've established by them needing to be present in order to release the locks. In this case, Tulin can use his wings to create a strong, horizontal gust of wind that both pushes you forward when gliding, and it blows enemies and objects away. Just like Revali's Gale, I used this ability all the time. You can ascend vertically in this game in plenty of ways, but traveling horizontally through the air can take a lot of resources, which is why Tulin comes in handy. The recurring ideas of both this quest and the dungeon are ascension, flight, and using the sky to see things from a new perspective. Accompanying shrines also focus on these things. You start at the base of a mountain and gradually work your way up by any means necessary. You can climb the old-fashioned way, you can use Zonai devices, you can ascend from inside of a cave, There are many ways to climb a mountain, and your path is just as valid. Once you reach the summit, however, you'll notice an assortment of floating platforms and flying ships that all lead toward a giant storm cloud in the sky. When you manage to ascend to this point, the typical chilling mountain music also ascends to something that sounds even more freezing, thanks to the increased pitch of that familiar instrument. But it also sounds hopeful and mysterious, beckoning to you in Tulin, as you can't wait to see the reality behind the Song of the Stormwind arc take shape. You'll use the sails of these flying ships to bounce high into the sky, allowing you to glide to new fragments of this scattered path. You might even be able to dive straight through some weakened ice, something that was actually conveyed subtly just outside of the Lucky Clover Gazette, and in front of the collapsed bridge to Rito Village. You'll find secrets hidden in the sides of these platforms, and shrines acting as your checkpoints in case you somehow lose your footing. The music increases in intensity and curiosity as you get further and further up, introducing strings and a climbing piano melody, and you'll reach a point where the only platforms you'll have left are the flying ships that encircle the storm cloud. You might even hear an accordion, something that would have normally existed as a part of Rito Village's theme if it hadn't frozen over, reminding you of what this ascent is all for. And eventually, you'll be higher than you ever thought you could go. There is an unsettling silence as you reach this point, yet the anticipation is at an all-time high, and you can dive straight into the storm cloud from here. As you approach the inside, diving further and further in, you'll realize that the Song of the Stormwind arc was telling the truth. Welcome to the Wind Temple, where all of this region's ideas coalesce. To release each lock, you'll have to find different angles to observe the ship through flying, gliding, and diving. The routes you take to reach the various components of the ship are entirely up to you to discover based on what you've learned throughout this region, and the rest of the game, as I've discussed. You'll be finding a way to dive into the center of the ship, entering and exiting the sides of the hull like in Skyward Sword's Sand Ship, and even hovering around the bottom of the ship just to find new entrances. There are multiple ways to approach each puzzle room, but the entire ship feels interconnected and can lead you to each puzzle in a variety of ways. The music builds from a quiet and cautious piece into the theme from when you and Teba attacked Vah Meadow in Breath of the Wild. And it reintroduces Rito Village's accordion as you get closer and closer to solving the temple. After all is said and done, you'll face a monster that proves that a dungeon boss doesn't need to be difficult to be memorable. Colgera. While skydiving, you'll have to dodge it as well as its attacks, all the while taking out its weak points either with your arrows mid-flight, just as Tulin trained himself to do in the flight range, or if you're attentive enough, you can dive straight through those weak points with perfect timing and positioning, just as you might have learned from those patches of ice. When you have Colgera on the ropes, the theme of the Rito will re-emerge, and I am not exaggerating when I say that hearing this theme again, while I fight an icy incarnation of a boss from Wind Waker's Wind Temple, all while the central themes and mechanics of this region combine, made for one of my favorite moments in any Zelda game. I do not say that lightly. This was a triumph. After the regional phenomena quest comes to an end, there remains a sage yet unaccounted for, and this will take you back to Kakariko Village to investigate the Ring Ruins. A task that was previously off limits before, and you'll follow the clues from this quest into Faron, exploring around the Zonai architecture that only mystified players in Breath of the Wild. Finally, you can dig into these ruins, collect a set of armor that will benefit you amidst the thundering aisles above you, and see where all of this will take you. All that's left to do is find a way up to those cloudy sky islands, known as the Thunderhead Isles. Visibility here is limited, and if you choose to use the charged set, you'll likely be sacrificing your defense in favor of the massive attack boost you get. Much like the other trips toward the dungeons in the sky, you can cross these islands and explore their various secrets in a multitude of ways, and this proves to be a huge focus in the upcoming dungeon, which you are led toward after finding a mysterious mask at the end of the islands. Through escorting this mask to Tobio's Hollow, you'll eventually be able to deliver it to the Construct Factory. This place is actually just a series of disconnected rooms, which was one of my biggest criticisms of the Divine Beasts, but it works in this area's favor, due to how intricate and challenging these puzzle depots can be. In each depot, you have to somehow navigate and deliver a limb to the golem in the center of the factory. You can do this through the deliberate design presented to you, but you pretty much have free reign to do whatever you want in order to get them to where they need to be. The only difference between any other puzzle is that you are constrained not by your buddies needing to stick with you, but by an unmoving physical object that you must carry with you using all of the knowledge you've accrued across the game. And this often resulted in some ridiculous instances of emergent gameplay that stand as some of the sharpest examples of Ultra Hand's potential. Take this instance where I first built a car out of the golem piece to drive across lava, and then I again had to do the same, but in such a way that my wheels would be positioned outside of these walls. Rather than figuring this out, I instead chose to carefully launch myself over with a rocket. Or how about this moment, where instead of finding a way to move the piece across this uniquely positioned piece of geometry, I instead combined recall with a contraption that launched the piece up into the air, so that I could just barely grab it and skip the puzzle. This makes more sense than whatever the hell I did on my first playthrough, but even that was entertaining. Because a lot of these puzzles can be difficult to chart even based on what is presented to you, it often made me feel like a cheeky bastard every time I did something that I knew I wasn't supposed to do. And that is when this game is absolutely at its best. I won't lie, one of my least favorite things about Tears of the Kingdom is actually how much freedom is afforded to you by Ultra Hand, as I feel it can make a lot of the game unsatisfying to solve. We'll talk about that a lot more soon, but these, as well as the other instances of unintended, creative, and hilarious solutions to problems, are what make this game such a marvel. And the reason these moments work is because of the rules and limitations imposed on you within. The coolest thing about all of this, though? I relayed the intended sequence of events to you, but they are not mandatory to stumble upon the Thunderhead Isles, or even the factory itself. I will once again reiterate that both of these games are entirely non-linear. If you are presented with a mystery, you will always have the means to solve it if you are creative enough. You can indeed find the Construct Factory simply by exploring, even before you find the mask required to open it up. You can attempt to push through the Thunderhead Isles without any preparation, just by thinking outside of the box, and your reward for clearing the Construct Factory is Mineru's Construct, a giant golem that can fuse Zonai devices to its arms and back, allowing you to harness their power in an entirely new and powerful context. It's like playing a completely different game as you take advantage of the devices this way. Not to mention, the path toward the Thunderhead Isles and the Construct Factory created a renewed sense of mystery after the 4 regional phenomena had a fairly similar plot structure. It's no secret that all of the regional phenomena have you chase down a clearly fake Zelda and watch the same cutscene multiple times, 2 things that I will address throughout this video. However, finally utilizing the mysterious architecture and ruins of the Zonai that I only dreamt about in the previous game, as well as connecting the 3 layers of Hyrule in a compelling and atmospheric manner, and leading players to a dungeon that always hid in plain sight, I consider it a highlight. It is perhaps the best example of the ever-present connection between the 3 layers of Hyrule. And speaking of connections, even with all of these expansions to Hyrule, the new focus on teaching the player about how they can harness their imagination, and the game's reinvented dungeons and the journeys to get there, my favorite part of this revisitation to an existing world doesn't have anything to do with any of that stuff, really. The real reason I am so grateful for that was because of how I was able to observe the will to rebuild and move forward in its people, and how they have reconnected after such a tragedy befell them. Though Hyrule might appear similar at first glance, just with a few unfamiliar stones, caves, and chasms strewn about, it quickly becomes apparent that despite the ongoing upheaval, Hyrule has rebuilt significantly in the time since Breath of the Wild. And that's what I want to focus on here, because I find it to be the most exciting and impactful part of Tears of the Kingdom's revamped and expanded Hyrule. At first, you'll find that Hudson construction has expanded out of Tarrytown, leaving building supplies at various points across Hyrule, which you can use in the construction of your Ultra Hand masterpieces. The settlement Lookout Landing has been established just outside of Hyrule Castle, where Pura, her assistant Josha, Robbie, and several others reside, aiming to study the now floating Hyrule Castle, as well as research developments throughout Hyrule. Skyview Towers have been erected with repurposed Sheikah technology, allowing you to survey Hyrule piece by piece, just as the Sheikah Towers did, and just like the previous game, you usually have to solve problems and scale the topography in order to reach these towers. You might have to ascend from inside of a cave, or find a way to lift someone up to help repair the tower, that sort of thing. Also, towers only reveal the general topography of Hyrule, not every single little collectible like in other open world games, for example, which I greatly prefer. If you've played Breath of the Wild, a lot of my points about why that game was such a refreshing take on the genre still stand here. Kind of. There's a whole chapter about my problems with that coming up. However, unlike the previous game, these towers will now rocket you into the sky, wherein you can survey Hyrule from the best angles possible, and glide over to nearby sky islands. Honestly, these sequences never get old. Skydiving in Tears of the Kingdom is exhilarating for the amount of control you have, but being able to just see an entire region and beyond from the sky is another story. One of my favorite symbols of this restoration, though, can be spotted if you head down the path to investigate the castle. You might spot a silent princess resting on a monument, established by Zelda in honor of the souls lost to the Calamity. The monument itself is poignant, but I fixated on the description of the silent princess this time. In Breath of the Wild it says, "Once feared to have gone extinct, it's recently been spotted growing in the wild." In this game, however, it's not uncommon to spot them growing in the wild. As a symbol of Zelda's dedication to restoring Hyrule, her kindness has touched everyone in some way, and the now common flower stands as a symbol of her efforts. This is without a doubt my favorite part of Tears of the Kingdom's expanded Hyrule. You can not only bear witness to everything Zelda has done for Hyrule, but also carry on the restoration efforts yourself in Zelda's footsteps. You can get a tangible sense of this impact once you take on the regional phenomena quests, but there's also scattered representations of her efforts across Hyrule, as well as ways Link can play a part in it. One of the most memorable quests in this game revolve around reuniting the Stable Trotters, as they not only allow the Great Fairies to re-emerge and upgrade your clothing, but you also get to hear their music expand little by little as they add each instrumentalist to the band. They will play at stables just as Cass did, and you can feel that missing bird's impact. I like to think he just spread his wings and left Hyrule for something new. He is a traveling bard after all. Anyway, in order to reunite the Stable Trotters and deliver them to the Great Fairies, you'll also have to build vehicles and whatnot to carry their wagon ever so delicately to their destination, or perhaps even rescue a bandmate from a pit. It is a fantastic example of how good it feels to reconnect people throughout Hyrule. Which also reminds me of that battalion that aims to liberate several monster-controlled bases and encampments. You can find them all over Hyrule, and what I love about these instances is that you are not the driving force behind these raids. You are merely assisting as part of a team, which is what this game is all about. Speaking of feeling a sense of community, it's worth mentioning Hiteno Village. Once again, I absolutely love this place. The always eccentric Cece has made her home here, selling her unique line of clothing. Not everyone is happy with this, however, such as Mayor Reed, who decries what has become of the village after Cece's fashion invasion. An election is called so that the people may democratically decide what the future of the town should entail. This quest will have you swaying the people in favor of Cece by offering them free mushrooms, as well as doing reconnaissance on each candidate in some pretty clever and humorous ways. Ultimately, the election resolves with the usually timid Sophie telling both candidates off for their narrow views on what this town can be. Both of them, to some extent, admire each other's desires for Hiteno, and they make amends and compromise, with Reed stating that the best way to keep Hiteno Village vibrant is to work together to combine traditional culture with new ideas. It's not only funny to spy on them and watch their fondness for each other's strategies come alive, but I felt that Reed's final statement ironically embodies what I think would be best for the Zelda series. I don't want to get ahead of myself on that, though. Lurelin Village gives you a chance to actually participate in the restoration efforts yourself, as the entire village has been ransacked by pirates. Okay, well, it's just a normal group of enemies, only you fight them on a pirate ship. A pirate ship that doesn't even sail around. Yeah, it's kind of a disappointment for me considering how much I love pirate fiction, but also just because it throws away an opportunity to create a unique group of enemies, just to make that discovery all the more special. I thought it was going to be like that part in both Oracle games, but oh well. Nevertheless, this is about what you can do for Lurelin. Bolson will task you with collecting logs to begin work on rebuilding. Not wood, as was the case in Breath of the Wild, but actual logs collected from trees, harnessing the true power of Ultra Hand and becoming the ultimate lumberjack. Much like Lurelin's existence in the previous game, rebuilding the village is quite relaxing. I enjoyed collecting and bundling together logs as best I could, as well as fitting the best palm tree logs I could find into the foundation of each building. As you do so, the people of Lurelin gradually return to the village, and the place livens up as a direct result of your hard work. You can even introduce a tourism incentive to Lurelin by establishing a water rally, and you can initiate a quest to find the island lobster shirt, a much more thematically appropriate way to implement what was once a DLC item in Breath of the Wild. I couldn't help but feel like, wherever she was, Zelda would be proud to see Link doing this for a small coastal village. My favorite questline in the game that involves connecting with the people of Hyrule starts at the Lucky Clover Gazette. Tracy, a journalist from Breath of the Wild that wrote the rumor mill found in various stables, has established her very own newspaper. In joining them, you'll investigate sightings of Zelda all over Hyrule, gradually earning pay rises and pieces of the Froggy armor set, which prevents you from slipping on wet surfaces. You can give yourself this buff through the sticky lizards as well, effectively solving the most annoying aspects of climbing in Breath of the Wild. Sort of. I mean, if you jump while climbing, you'll still slip right away, so it's best to just have patience while wearing this armor. Anyway, these stories are an absolute delight to chase down. You might have an encounter with a talking Kuko, you might charge into a cave in just your underwear as a group in Eldin are convinced Zelda told them to do so, you might investigate some missing farm tools and be greeted with a familiar, flower-loving face, you might find a huge golden horse that is said to belong to Zelda. Hell, you might run into someone that looks like Zelda herself in the Dueling Peaks. It's not. I absolutely loved this questline for its lighthearted tone and the concept of reporting on stories across Hyrule, just giving the world a sense of connection. By the end of the quest, Pen will have sequestered himself to a spot where a famous bard once played and studied the songs of Hyrule. Now here we have Pen wanting to follow in his footsteps, much like I wanted to follow in Zelda's by reconnecting with and restoring parts of Hyrule. The quest is a reinterpretation of Cass's songs that contain riddles across Hyrule, and I love them. There are even little details that just make revisiting this Hyrule mean so much to me. I didn't notice this until it was pointed out to me, but in Breath of the Wild, Haz was just some random soldier in Akala, but in this game, he's ascended the ranks all the way to captain of one of the monster control crew groups that you can fight alongside, as I mentioned earlier. Really, I am just so grateful for this game's decision to revisit the same Hyrule. I'm grateful we were able to see all of these people again, and that we were able to see the world heal, because usually, Zelda moves on from past settings, even if characters reappear. But now, I can see Coco, who once resolved to be strong after her mother's death, selling ring garlands in Kakariko Village, now a little taller and more well-spoken than she was before. I can speak to Paya, who has overcome her anxieties and is able to lead Kakariko with a smile on her face, and far more confidence than before. I can run into this guy in Gerudo Town who is just as pathetic as he was before. I can witness the continued misadventures of the Yiga clan and feign loyalty to them as I collect their gear across Hyrule and earn the Lightning Helm, which they apparently stole from the Gerudo. Damn, I gotta give them credit for this one. I can help my beloved Isha once again by rescuing her from a peninsula in the desert, and have her make powerful earrings for me, as well as anything else. Either way, I am typically glad that Zelda continues to not pursue direct sequels a lot of the time, but just this once, I am grateful to be here again. There's more I have to say about the way Zelda has sparked a restoration of Hyrule, but I want to save that for when I speak in more detail about this game's core message, as well as when I talk about Zelda's whereabouts on the whole. All of these systems, mechanics, ideas, and quests come together to make Tears of the Kingdom a welcome reinvention of what a non-linear Zelda game and the notion of player freedom in Zelda can look like. But it isn't without its issues. And I think its issues are more glaring than the issues that Breath of the Wild carried. Initially, I ignored these things. I was having too much fun playing around with what they'd built, and cherishing my time in Hyrule. I could try to ignore them further, but they encompass a much more thorough representation of how I feel about this game at present. You might have noticed that I haven't said much about the game's Sky Islands beyond the initial tutorial island, and this is not by accident. Just to get this out of the way, I think the things you do in the sky are often a lot of fun. Its floating platforms are often segmented, and sometimes spread far apart, meaning that you'll have to get creative in order to traverse them. You might have to escort a shrine crystal across these islands with that creative thinking. You might have to rotate a floating sphere in order to grab treasure, or connect mirrors together and obtain a sage's will or an old map. You might have to skydive for a piece of armor, or solve an interconnected labyrinth that takes you into a low-gravity zone, and then straight into the depths for a fight with a flux construct. All the while, its atmosphere is a relaxing reprieve from the rest of Hyrule. It is so tranquil to just exist up here, while the only other beings you'll run into are constructs. From everything I've said about the ideas in place here, you'd think that I have nothing but praise for the sky. But honestly, I feel that the sky is a microcosm of Tears of the Kingdom being driven by a series of loops and categorical discoveries, rather than a consistent atmosphere of wonder. These challenges in the sky are repeated throughout, to the point where it can become exhausting to clear them all out. I like the sky in microdoses, without question, but it doesn't feel like a fully fleshed out layer to Hyrule, instead being a diversion that accompanies your central journey through Hyrule, which is baffling considering how much of the game's marketing focused on the sky, and how the team wanted it to be a seamless realization of what they wanted to do in Skyward Sword, that being Wind Waker in the sky, to put it simply. You can at least seamlessly travel between all three layers, and it makes for some wonderful moments, but the savory meat of the sky just isn't always consistently cooked to perfection. Rather, it's like eating a meal you love way too often to the point of getting sick of it. And speaking of Skyward Sword, a game that repeats its best ideas multiple times to the point of them becoming repetitive, that is exactly how I would describe the vast majority of Tears of the Kingdom's many loops and systems. That thing I said about liking the sky in microdoses is what the entirety of this game's design banks on. It is stuffed full of coexisting systems and ideas, just as Breath of the Wild was, so that any notion of something getting repetitive is firmly cast aside because there's always some other activity to do. Caves are an idea that I didn't hesitate to praise as a fresh utilization of an existing map, and I still totally feel that way, but that doesn't change the fact that you're going into these caves for a bubble gem every time, if not for a shrine or quest. The depths are full of Zonite to mine, and you need that Zonite for auto-build in your energy wells, the keyword there being need. I don't collect Zonite because I always enjoy doing it. Sometimes I'm down in the depths because I just need more ways to spawn my creations with auto-build, or I want more energy wells. Having the player need materials is obviously not a bad thing, it's just that the act of doing this is not really exciting, unlike fighting enemies for fuse materials. While we're at it, sometimes it's not that the act of doing something is dull, it's that I'm being pulled in several different directions just so that the game might keep my attention, which is something that Breath of the Wild did, but it doesn't feel as special this time. There are quests everywhere, there's Koroks to collect, there's freaking Addison signs to prop up. All of these things are each a category of discovery repeated throughout the game world, a game world that I am already familiar with. But then again, Breath of the Wild was built like this too, and it also had repeated concepts. So what am I going on about? Well, Breath of the Wild's many gameplay loops were all in service of surviving and discovering, and they were grounded by how comparatively limited Link was, something that we will get into shortly. Materials were only used for cooking and selling, they weren't also used for combat like they are here with Fuse. Caves weren't a category of discovery like they are now, they were a genuinely exciting find, especially after going through the effort to unearth them. I think the reason I am starting to feel this fatigue is because Tears of the Kingdom is entirely built on top of an existing game, rather than being set in an entirely new world with new systems. Rather than having a series of loops that all felt interconnected and in service of a central idea, you instead have loops that feel transparent in how they are driving players through the same world by simply darting their attention all over the place. You pay attention to all of them so that you're never truly bored, but they all exist on top of an already completed game, rather than as an extension or realization of a new one. Some of them carry their weight brilliantly, of course. Fuse and its utilization of materials is clever, as discussed, but others tire me out. It's hard to pin down exactly how I feel about this, and I've tried my best, but I firmly believe that if they had designed a world specifically for Tears of the Kingdom's central mechanics, no retrofitting an old map, instead a seamless world entirely built around what is possible with Ultra Hand and everything else, the game would have been an absolute marvel by every metric. But because the game is not that, and has all of the systems and holdovers from the previous game, it is not entirely its own thing. And you can feel it. New portions of the world, such as caves and my favorite moments in the depths and the sky, are already proof enough of how well a new map would work within this game's central mechanics, with how you explore and solve these little chunks of new level design, and it's why I tend to cite their seamless quests and puzzles for revealing shrines as some of the best this expanded Hyrule has to offer. Because it's not just the same Hyrule, they are curated portions of the game, built specifically for your new abilities. One of the more obvious examples of this inconsistent reuse of the same map can be observed in how shrines are placed this time around. When shrines are hidden away in caves or found through utilization of Tears of the Kingdom's new ideas, it's amazing to unearth them. Lake Hylia's layered shrine puzzle that combines the sky and an underwater cave is incredibly satisfying, just as one example. But other times, deliberate usage of geometry in Breath of the Wild has been completely ignored or abandoned in this game. Take the Dueling Peaks, for example. In that game, it was a beautiful test of your ability to first prepare for the long climb, and then tackle it by managing your stamina effectively. One shrine carried the solution to the other, and vice versa, so you'd need to scale the whole mountain, and you'd be rewarded with climbing gear as a result. While Tears of the Kingdom definitely listened to my desires for discovering more armor in the world, the Dueling Peaks have a shrine just sitting there, overlooking the stable. Why not build something out of this mountain that makes clever use of the potential of Ultra Hand? I know there are caves you can find in these mountains now, but there are caves everywhere. Caves don't make this landmark feel special. How about Akala's spiraling beach in Breath of the Wild? You had to somehow navigate a ball to its pedestal by any means necessary in order to activate the shrine. In this game, the shrine is just sitting there. Again. How about Eventide Island? It's much easier to get there thanks to Ultra Hand, and the pirates you fight are just the same mobs you'd normally fight. There is a chasm you can dive into there, but that doesn't change the fact that an incredible island from the previous game has been reused in a much lamer context. Now, to this game's credit, the philosophy behind Eventide taking away all of your items and weapons has been carried over to the Proving Ground shrines. These things do just that, and they always present a new context for you to scavenge for weapons and take out constructs while being naked and defenseless. They are far superior to the tests of strength from the previous game. They even have a shrine that has Link navigate pitch darkness, like Thyflow Ruins from the previous game. So what about Thyflow Ruins now? It's completely lit up. Okay, well, to be fair, the dragon puzzles there are fun to figure out just based on the descriptions you are given, but this is exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about. A lot of places that once held a lot of weight now exist as shadows of their former selves. There are still a lot of great reuses of Breath of the Wild's map. You can refer to what I said about Korok Forest, the Lome Labyrinths, Hiteno and Lurelin, and the regional phenomena as examples of that. And those are just ones I've mentioned for the sake of keeping this video at least somewhat succinct. You know, as succinct as a feature-length retrospective can be. But I constantly find myself conflicted by how each place has been repurposed. It never feels consistent across the board, in one way or the other. Sometimes feeling refreshing, but other times feeling like wasted potential. Other times it's not because the shrines are placed in lackluster ways, it is because they are simply way too easy to access due to the nature of problem solving this time around. And this brings us to the very mechanic that I think makes this game impossible for me to revisit with the same perspective I once held. Ultra Hand. The mechanic, as I discussed at length, is an incredible achievement, and no one can take that away from this game. At the same time, it is so overpowered that it renders a lot of the game pathetically easy when you have all of this knowledge the game conveys committed to memory. On one hand, it is amazing that this creative thinking became so embedded into my gameplay that it was as second nature to me as breathing. On the other hand, it renders a lot of the game's problem solving some of the easiest and most straightforward I have ever seen in a Zelda game, because I am always able to identify a solution. On a first playthrough, I was enamored with learning about what was possible, but because all of these things become so closely tied to everything that I create in this game, every single problem immediately has a clear solution. If I ever see a gap or elevated platform that I need to reach, I fuse a bomb flower to my shield or use a rocket or a spring. If I ever need to fly somewhere or cover a lot of horizontal distance, I create an air bike or a plane. If I ever need to mine, I use a cannon or a makeshift hammer. Every single problem may have 100 different solutions or more, and those solutions may be a testament to Ultra Hand's flexibility, but that matters so little when you can use the same 3 or 4 solutions each time. I think the game is at its best on repeat playthroughs when you challenge yourself to use alternative solutions, just so that you can observe how malleable this game can be, but even then, those alternative solutions can be just as easy to find due to how powerful Ultra Hand is. I think you can get pretty creative with Ultra Hand in combat, but I strongly feel as though you don't need to intimately engage with this mechanic or build Godzilla to solve most of this game. That doesn't mean the game is shallow, far from it. You can do anything you can dream of in this game, but that doesn't necessarily mean I have to apply myself. If you want a clear-cut example of what I'm talking about, you needn't look any further than this shrine right here, the right roll. It is possibly the most important shrine in the game when discussing the game's puzzle difficulty being entirely dynamic and extraordinarily creative, yet at the same time, kind of easy. The intended solution in this final puzzle is to assemble the balls in such a way that they roll into the switch at the bottom. In the second part of the shrine, this becomes an essential teaching tool in showing you how physics can play a part in your creations, as the Construct Factory has a similar puzzle regarding the placement of the wheels. But really, this kind of thinking is present throughout the entire game. That being said, it is not the only solution here. You could stack the balls up and then have them fall into the switch with enough force. Or, you could shoot the switch with a bomb flower, the easy route. This is the dichotomy of puzzle solving in this game for me. It can either be the most incredible thing ever, or a complete joke, due to how open-ended the game is by nature. A lot of Tears of the Kingdom allows players to take the easy route for some of the puzzles they've designed, and it results in a mixture of moments that feel incredibly rewarding when you think outside of the box, and moments that are just underwhelming and lame because of how firmly ingrained a lot of the unorthodox thinking becomes. No matter what the result, it is of course a remarkable achievement to design a game that can be played this way without caveats, but it also results in a game that I think can be inconsistent when it comes to difficulty and reward. Puzzle solving in Tears of the Kingdom can be best described with this video right here, in which all of these differently shaped blocks all fit into the same hole. All of the possible solutions here are really exciting when you are stumped on a problem and you want to find a way to solve it, as well as when you discuss the game and share your findings with other people. It harkens back to the original Legend of Zelda, where people discussed the game's secrets with their friends so that everyone could get a little further in exploring Hyrule. At the same time, it also means that no problem is too great due to the limitless potential of Ultra Hand. As you could imagine, I was burnt out more than I was excited about the creative potential of Ultra Hand after a certain point, because no matter the shape of the blocks, I could always fit them in that square hole. While learning how to create certain things is exciting on a single playthrough, it means that revisiting the game with all of this collective knowledge is not going to be anywhere near as exciting for me as it was when I first played it. And that sucks because I never like to leave a Zelda game at a single playthrough. I've replayed all of these games multiple times over the course of my life, hence my discussion of my evolving perspectives on each of them and the value of the series as art. Not being able to do that in order to appreciate the game more might sting a little, but I think it just shows that offering this much freedom has only led to me craving limitations once again. I've always been a huge proponent of limitations breeding creativity, as thinking around what cannot be done or depicted means bringing life to a lot of abstract and unorthodox ideas, sort of like how Avatar: The Last Airbender is a show about war, totalitarianism, genocide, free will, discrimination, indoctrination, and so much more, and it aired on Nickelodeon, a children's network. Hell, even the concept of bending was created from the network's desire to depict action without physical contact. As a result, there are plenty of adults today who regard it as one of the greatest television shows of all time, due to its depiction of these issues being unique to the world crafted by the writers and artists. Even when you lack restrictions on what can be said or shown, you may still have to work within the confines of your own medium. And this is where stories like, say, Berserker Vagabond, despite being restricted to the printed pages of manga, do everything within their medium to convey motion and emotion, with your imagination filling in the gaps thanks to their powerful artwork. They are beautiful not in spite of their limitations, but because of them. In the context of Zelda, limitations mean using an item, putting two very deliberate pieces together in order to realize what can be done, opening new doors, and eventually allowing you to reach the next item, each item gradually lifting your limitations, allowing you to combine items, and you can feel yourself getting stronger. While this is very much still present in Tears of the Kingdom as you learn about each Zonai device and how they connect, there is no true limit to what can be done, leading to my eventual burnout once I had advanced knowledge. This game consistently reminds me of the importance of limitations when aiming to inspire creativity. When I look back at Breath of the Wild's instances of emergent gameplay, it is clear to me that those moments were a result of the tools being open-ended and well-designed, but also through their limitations being explicitly clear. The entire game wasn't designed around launching yourself with stasis, for example. It was a byproduct of these tools being intended for use in specific ways, yet still made to be widely applicable. Those moments of cheeky satisfaction felt way more organic there, because now, you can basically do whatever you want in order to break the game in half. This is also part of why I praised the Echoes mechanic in Echoes of Wisdom as a reinterpretation of Ultra Hand. As you collect echoes, it gives you a tangible sense of progression, where you are gradually lifting limitations, rather than the only limitation being your imagination. In Tears of the Kingdom, if I want to build an energy-efficient flying machine as soon as I've landed in Hyrule, all I really need to obtain is a steering stick and 2 fans. Even if I'm not using an air bike, I could create a hovercraft or a plane with a cart on the bottom in order to fly and hover basically wherever I need to go, shattering any challenge that would have been in place when it comes to verticality and lateral thinking. If there's a gap I need to cross, I've got 1,000,001 ways to do that. Sure, you need to actually have these devices on hand, but it's not like they're difficult to obtain. You can just visit the machines that dispense them or waddle over to a stable. Hell, you don't even need to have them on hand if you have enough Zonite. I don't feel like I'm being challenged or tested when I have all of this knowledge. I feel like I'm just going through the motions whenever a challenge is presented to me. This is why I never view this game as making Breath of the Wild look like some sort of prototype. It pains me to say it, but all that I've discussed completely destroys not only a lot of the shrine puzzles, due to the fact that I've already inherited a lot of this game's knowledge and concepts, and even on my first playthrough I found they could be redundant or pitifully easy after accumulating a certain amount of knowledge, but also a lot of the design and problem solving in place in the game's dungeons. Except for the Lightning Temple. That one rocks precisely because of its very deliberate solutions and restricted movement. I still stand by its design firmly. But when it comes to the more open-air design of the other 3, you can basically do whatever you want. The Fire Temple is perhaps the worst example of this in the game, and it's funny because you might recall if you saw my first playthrough that I at one point considered it my favorite dungeon in the game. You have this wonderful interconnected series of minecart tracks that link up to each puzzle, but none of that matters because Yunobo will fly with you on whatever flying contraption you've built, meaning that you can hover over to every single puzzle room and solve it without leaving him behind. I lean more positively toward the Wind Temple in this case due to it being a flying ship, therefore the power of flight feels appropriate, especially with how closed off a lot of the paths can feel. The Water Temple, on the other hand, is not only just a few disconnected shrine puzzles, so to speak, just as the Divine Beasts could be, but solving these puzzles is so unbelievably easy, even disregarding the fact that Ultra Hand gives you boundless creative potential. It does contain all of the concepts introduced throughout Lanayru, but the ideas are pretty shallow and puzzles end before they've truly begun, which is further impacted by the lack of interconnectedness that the Wind and Lightning temples demonstrated. When you factor in the fact that you can do whatever you want with Ultra Hand here, the dungeon is over rather quickly. Oh, and Muktarok might be an extension of the region's focus on dealing with sludge, but he is not fun to fight, like at all. I don't like trudging through and cleaning up all of this crap on the ground just to deal damage to him. No thank you. If you ask me, the answer to this problem is actually pretty simple. In fact, it's already in place in the game's shrines. Prevent players from using the Zonai devices in their inventory, and instead have them use whatever is available to them in the dungeon. Limitations like this would force players to actually interact with the otherwise easy-to-neglect design of the Fire Temple, as well as glide around the flying ship that is the Wind Temple with nothing but their wits and their situational awareness. Even in a sandbox game like this, I think limitations can breed creativity of the best kind. Even so, there have been exceptions to my feelings here. The Construct Factory's instances of creativity, the various unique solutions I found in shrines that didn't reflect any of the common solutions I brought up, and the many other goofy ways I experimented that make it such an impressive and fun game. I do have one strong exception to my feelings regarding this diminished difficulty though. Much like Breath of the Wild's faltering purpose for scavenging was thrown for a loop by Lionel hunting, Tears of the Kingdom consistently gives thinking creatively a purpose through the triumphant return of Gleeoks. These bosses are perhaps one of Tears of the Kingdom's greatest triumphs in design. Not only are they far stronger and more intimidating than Lionel's due to their size, but they come in 3 forms that all harness a certain element, their 3 heads can act independently of one another and all must be taken down. They can fly up into the air, they can track you effortlessly, and they can create updrafts and icicles that you can use recall on, practically beckoning you to join them in the sky. Most importantly of all though, they can destroy most Zonai devices in one hit, disassembling whatever you might have built, meaning that you have to get especially creative with your builds to account for their attacks. Otherwise you will be humbled immediately, much like I was when I first fought them. There are also King Gleeok variants which have each head use a specific element, meaning that your strategy of accommodating one element from before won't be enough. Oh, and they have their very own theme to accompany your epic battles with them, embodying the absolute chaos that battles with them invite. When you finally open them up to relentless attacks, the way the music ramps up and cheers me on never fails to make me smile. Upon defeating a Gleeok, oftentimes by the skin of my teeth, I am rewarded with its parts that not only yield high attack values, but also feature elemental benefits, allowing me to create a strong elemental weapon whenever I feel I need them. So naturally, I tended to try my hand at fighting these things whenever I could, even if it meant getting my ass kicked. I completely understand why Gleeoks are the exception here, as they are designed to feel like the ultimate test of your knowledge and approaches to situations, but it's moments like these that make me think, hot damn, they built a pretty amazing game here. Granted, there are plenty of these moments all across Tears of the Kingdom, as I've outlined in this video, but there are also moments where that broad expansion of multiplicative gameplay results in solutions that come too easy a lot of the time. Without a doubt though, one of the worst casualties of this game reusing the structure of Breath of the Wild is seeing how it impacts its story. In the previous game, the events of the past were told through memories, a system that I personally adored, especially in a game that aimed to be completely non-linear. Every photo depicted a location where an important moment in yours and Zelda's past took place. Though the story's events were told out of order, it gave emotional weight to each of the locations depicted, so that whenever you were standing in one, you were reminded of that moment. It was fun to piece it all together. Additionally, it's important to note that the events of the past had no bearing on the story told in the present. How the scattered fragments of Hyrule have been able to go on living is an entirely separate story from that of Princess Zelda's, but that doesn't mean there is any sort of disconnect. The events of that story are tragic, but they eventually led to a world that has learned to move past such tragedy. Just as Zelda said of the Silent Princess, our species was resilient enough to survive on its own. As we know, Tears of the Kingdom is once again entirely non-linear, meaning that if you know exactly where to find Ganondorf, you can go fight him the moment you land in Hyrule. Now, the way this is structured initially is actually pretty cool, because you have to learn where he is either from the main quest, the Master Koga quest, or just by either picking up on it early or exploring on your own terms. Kind of like how you can either learn about the Thunderhead Isles and the Construct Factory, or find them yourself. And much like Breath of the Wild, if you decide to fight Ganondorf that early, you'll have to fight every single dungeon boss back to back before fighting him, on your own. That being said, the repurposed structure directly conflicts with the story they attempt to tell in this game. At first, it establishes itself as a compelling mystery and a continuation of the atmosphere conveyed in the game's introduction, but as soon as you begin searching for the Tears of the Dragon, this game's memories, it all falls apart. The events that take place in these memories do not have much in the way of accompanying context as Breath of the Wild's memories did. In that game, the champion's descendants and the towns they hail from had all been impacted by the champion's deaths in some way. And you can observe that even without having the additional context of Zelda's failure to awaken to her powers. That, and you are immediately connected with Link, and are able to embody him as a vessel because of his amnesia. He knows just as much as you do when you begin, and you learn about his past at the same time he does. In this game, there is no connecting thread other than, I want to find Princess Zelda. And the story is one that absolutely, desperately needs to be told linearly. While you can observe the proper order to find each geoglyph in the Forgotten Temple, I and many other people did not do this, leading to a scattered, clumsily told narrative where you could potentially learn of Rauru's wife Sonia's death before you've even met her. You could watch Ganondorf conquer Hyrule before ever seeing him pledge his fealty to Rauru. I am dead serious when I say you could open a cutscene on Zelda holding Sonia's motionless body before you ever watch them have a conversation. In Breath of the Wild, we already knew that everyone was dead pretty much from the beginning when we met King Rome. We just didn't get to observe that journey Zelda took to awaken her powers until we collected the memories. Before we view the memories in this game, we know nothing about the founding of Hyrule and the Zonai. We know nothing about Rauru, Sonia, and Mineru, other than the fact that Rauru was Hyrule's first king. The Imprisoning War is built up as a grand event in the foundation of Hyrule, and to allow that story to be told out of order is like showing us Gandalf returning as Gandalf the White, and then the next scene we see is Gandalf being dragged to his presumed demise by the Balrog. Kind of softens the blow when you know what's gonna happen, doesn't it? If that weren't enough, because of the strong disconnect between the events of Rauru's time period and Link's in the present day, and the fact that you are not an active participant in those events this time around, you don't really get a solid glimpse into the kind of people that Rauru, Sonia, Mineru, or even Ganondorf truly were. Even if you experience these memories in order, the game runs you through the events that led up to the Imprisoning War, as we can assume they happened anyway. Mineru relays the effects of draconification to Zelda, Zelda becomes the Sage of Time after Ganondorf betrays Rauru and kills Sonia, and despite gathering all of the sages to battle Ganondorf, they are all overpowered in the end, before Rauru seals Ganondorf away. We never learn about what kind of monarch Rauru was like we did with King Rome. We never learn about why Rauru and Sonia loved each other or how they came to be married. We never see their children despite Zelda apparently being a direct descendant of them. We never learn who these other sages are beyond where they hail from. And we never learn about who Ganondorf was, aside from the fact that he is a truly evil son of a bitch that thrives on power and inflicting misery. It recounts these events as if you are reading them from a history textbook. Characters may display outward emotion in response to these events, but I don't ever feel a sense of connection with any of them beyond Zelda, who was already an established character thanks to the previous game. And that's a shame because there's so much excellent potential in place here. But this game is bound by the structure of the previous game, forcing us to take part in a journey entirely separate from Zelda's in the past. This was already a problem people levied at Breath of the Wild's narrative structure, and it was one that I could completely understand. I wanted to see more of the champions rather than just grieve their deaths, but that is also part of why I felt that game handled its structure far better. A lot of those past events created a sense of grief and motivated me to see how Hyrule had lived on since then. But we've had 2 years to process these cutscenes and a spin-off game, And I still don't feel like I know anything about these people. From what I've seen of Rauru, I absolutely loved his demeanor and personality, but we never learned anything about his rule over Hyrule, other than the fact that he definitely was a king. I see a lot of Zelda's kind-heartedness in Sonia, but she dies after the only cutscene where I was able to glean anything from who she was. Ganondorf was the first male born to the Gerudo in 100 years, just like his previous incarnations, but we don't learn anything of his upbringing or his rise to power. Much like his depiction in Ocarina of Time, he lives for power in conquering Hyrule. To be fair, considering how heavily they leaned into that in Ocarina of Time's story, to the point where he is playing his own theme on an organ at the top of his tower, and how much I loved that, I don't really lament his depiction here all that much. What I do lament is the fact that his impact on the Gerudo in a young Hyrule is not ever explored. In Age of Imprisonment, we get to see a little bit of this through Artie, one of the sages who mentions that her Gerudo pride prevented her from reaching out for help during Ganondorf's tyrannical reign, but that is really all we get, and that little glimpse goes for the rest of the sages, honestly. If I might be brutally honest, my favorite part of anything out of that game's story was the mysterious construct in Calamo, and learning about the identity of the ancient tree stump in present-day Hyrule. If you know, you know. The funny thing is that Age of Imprisonment is the only reason I know the names of the sages from back then. This game puts absolutely zero effort into defining these characters, and this is painfully evident after you complete each of the game's dungeons. Now, I want to reiterate that I believe the Zelda team is by far one of the best in the industry, and will likely always be. Anytime they make a decision that I disagree with, I can almost always understand where they are coming from. Skyward Sword's focus on those 3 regions may have led to a frustrating amount of repetition in an already repetitious and straightforward game, but it at least meant that they could flesh out those regions and their mechanics in awesome ways that would not have been possible if you visited 6 regions once, for example. The decision to repeat what is essentially the same cutscene 4 times across each dungeon is one of the most baffling decisions the Zelda team has ever made, and one that I cannot justify for any reason. I always put the controller down when they recount the imprisoning war, because they say the same thing every single time. In the grand scheme of things, you might think this is a minor annoyance, but it is a huge missed opportunity in this game's storytelling to have the sages be this wooden and pointless, and a representation of just how lackluster this game's world building is. The one thing that would have made the 4 repeated cutscenes better would be if their stories parallel the arcs of the present-day stages, with their arcs being more fleshed out. Tulin, for example, wants to gain independence, but is in too much of a hurry to grow up in order to gain it. Sidon is about to get married and he doesn't feel as adequate of a leader as Mipha was. Riju's diary in Breath of the Wild shed light on her fears as a leader, and by Tears of the Kingdom it's a bit of a retread, but they could have done something that connects her with Artie, since I was interested in her in Age of Imprisonment most of all. They could have easily allowed these sages to give impassioned speeches to each of their descendants from the lessons they've learned in the past, resulting in far more emotionally resonant conclusions to each dungeon, and something that ties into the central theme of connecting, as the present-day sages all learn to value the help and advice of others. All of this is a result of the game being beholden to the previous game's structure. If this game was an all-new journey through the Hyrule of the past, with an entirely new structure, and you took part in the events of the imprisoning war, then they would have far more room to explore who these characters were. You may have lost out on the continued world building and character development, but the story of the imprisoning war, the game's world, and its mechanics all would have benefited greatly from it being built from the ground up. I won't comment on this game's haphazard connections to Breath of the Wild, such as the Vanishing Sheikah technology, though I do find it to be another example of the team wanting to do something completely new, whilst being forced to stay within the world that exists already. Now, thankfully I have more to say about this game's narrative, and not all of it is purely criticism, and we'll talk about all of that in due time. In fact, I actually have a lot to say in defense of this game's writing and story structure. But the reason I highlight these issues is because its adherence to the structure of memories in the previous game is only a detriment to the potential of the story being told, and it is a microcosm of my issues with this game as a standalone work. It has so many ideas that strive to be distinct from Breath of the Wild, but at the risk of sounding like a broken record, those ideas cannot truly break free and flourish as an individual game because they are all built on top of another. A lot of the most common criticisms from those who haven't been able to embrace this reinvention of Zelda have to do with its non-linear design and sense of scale being driven by systems and loops, and its dungeons being disconnected puzzle rooms, and though this game takes huge steps to improve on that existing structure, its similarity to the previous game has only exacerbated the disdain for Zelda's new sense of direction. Even for those that are more accepting of it, the cracks are visible here. I have a feeling that they didn't intend for this game to take as long as it did, but because they spent so long working on this monumental feat of game design, it inevitably took 6 years to complete, which means that revisiting this structure was necessary but a less novel concept after such a long wait. Revisiting this world is one thing. I was delighted to see how things had changed and evolved, and meet up with characters from the previous game. The structure, however, I am all for them continuing to pursue this new open-ended sort of Zelda, and Tears of the Kingdom absolutely demonstrated the potential that this kind of design contains, as I outlined with the gradual progression in ideas across each region, and the awesome design of the Lightning Temple. But as for the material collecting and the general reinterpretation of genre tropes, it was groundbreaking when Breath of the Wild did it, but in no way does it ooze longevity. Whatever comes next, it can still be non-linear and be a reinvention of Zelda just as they are interested in pursuing, but it also needs to be entirely distinct, and learn from both past successes and mistakes. I keep going on and on about this game being built on top of the previous game, and the fact that it uses the exact same structure, but going forward I want to expand on what I think a non-linear Zelda could be if it did not simply adhere to the systems in place in Breath of the Wild, because I don't think those systems necessarily need to always govern a non-linear Zelda game, even one of this scope. I don't think anyone can truly predict what will come next for Zelda, which is what makes it such a wonderful series. But that doesn't mean we can't at least try to inform the future. Remember how Hiteno's mayoral election quest ended with Cece and Reed agreeing that traditional culture should be combined with new ideas? It's funny how that quest seems to embody what I feel the future of Zelda should look like. There's a prevailing narrative amidst a non-zero number of Zelda fans that the series needs to revisit its old formula, and that it was better. They want to receive a new item in a dungeon, and then use that item to solve the rest of the dungeon. I can't necessarily blame them. Even with the improvements to dungeons I've outlined in this game, they in no way come close to touching 3D Zelda dungeons of ages past. While I feel existing elements of the formula could very well be reintroduced in a non-linear setting, I also feel it is reductive to constantly cling to the past like this. In order to see the future a little more clearly, I think it is once again best to focus on what Zelda can be, rather than what it was. As long as that sense of satisfaction, mystery, discovery, and adventure persists, then the spirit of Zelda is alive and well, and that's what I want to talk about in this chapter. The old formula was good at delivering that through exceptionally tight game design, but that doesn't mean that spirit is lost on new Zelda. I also don't feel the divide between old and new Zelda has to be a binary choice. For example, my current 3 favorite Zelda games are Wind Waker, Majora's Mask, and Breath of the Wild. They all embody the spirit of Zelda in their own remarkable ways. If these recent games truly embody the only future the Zelda team sees in the series, then I feel they should continue to reassess what a Zelda game can be with each entry, just as they did before Breath of the Wild broke conventions. Let's not forget that Skyward Sword was the tipping point for the traditional formula in the face of the rest of the industry. Not only did it burn people out on the typical Zelda conventions, especially due to the game's excessive linearity and repetitious elements, but Zelda's formula simply wasn't leaving the same impact on the medium as it once did. The landscape for games had changed completely. The action-adventure genre was dominated by open-world games that all followed an existing framework, with few of them having the actions you perform in them be meaningful. If you wanted a world more deliberately curated for a puzzle box sort of experience, then you can't go without mentioning the works of Hidetaka Miyazaki, which really took off with the release of Dark Souls in 2011, the same year as Skyward Sword. As for linear action-adventure games, Naughty Dog established cinematic, story-driven games full of action set pieces and puzzles that used a mixture of scripting and player agency. The existing Zelda formula was certainly intelligent enough to have its place amidst all of these games, but its voice was no longer as loud and as universal as it once was. Things were changing, and developers were moving forward without them. After experimenting with non-linearity through A Link Between Worlds, Breath of the Wild inarguably broke the open world mold when it first released. It gave the genre a renewed sense of meaning through Zelda's focus on problem-solving and exploration, whilst also embodying open in the term open world by giving players complete freedom to do everything and anything, however they liked, after leaving the Great Plateau. And yet, despite this game being so drastically different from previous Zelda games, I argued a couple of years ago that it still very much carried the spirit of Zelda, that sense of discovery that permeates all of those little moments throughout the series, that moment of realizing what is possible and how to solve a problem, that feeling of satisfaction when you solve said problem and reap the rewards, that sense of wonder as you think about what might be hiding in every corner of the world. It has all been repurposed through a serious re-examination of what Zelda can be. As I said in my Breath of the Wild video, it is less about what you are doing and more about how you feel when you do those things. As I've repeated countless times by now, Tears of the Kingdom is built on top of Breath of the Wild, and therefore, it is difficult for it to be a true evolution. While I think it is an excellent demonstration of the spirit of Zelda through its focus on player expression, it is constrained by its predecessor's structure and world in numerous ways, preventing it from truly moving the series forward. But that is precisely why I do not believe it to be the death knell for this new framework. I still think we have yet to see the further capabilities of non-linear open-ended Zelda. It's just a shame that Tears of the Kingdom's central focus was so ambitious that it took what would have otherwise been a straightforward sequel much longer to develop. And in order to truly see that evolution we've been waiting for, we're going to have to wait even longer. As I mentioned though, there are plenty of people who don't want an evolution out of the next 3D Zelda. They just want something with familiar conventions and a distinctive premise, like Ocarina, Majora, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. But they're probably not going to get it from the Zelda team, because simply put, they don't want to make it. And if they don't want to, then why should they feel obligated to? The developers have exhausted themselves on building games in the same style for so long. This is why Aonuma is so vocal about continuing to move forward with a less restrictive framework. Some interpreted his words as dismissive in an interview he gave about fans yearning for a return to the classic formula, chalking up those lingering desires to mere nostalgia. And I get why people took issue with him saying that. There are many elements of the old formula that simply have tighter design by nature of it being a more deliberately crafted series of events. Linearity does not in any way equal bad, which is not what he said, to be fair, but he definitely wasn't interested in linearity anymore. But that's exactly what I took away from the interview. He had been creating the same kind of game for a very long time, and wanted to experiment and try new things. Therefore, rather than thinking about how Zelda can simply go back to what it was, we should instead think about how Zelda can learn from its past to continue into the future. The Zelda team has consistently revolved their games around entirely new concepts each time, and the next game will be no different. The question now is, what will that game look like? While we know very little at the moment, the next Zelda will indeed be a fresh start for the series. When asked if the next Zelda will be a sequel to Tears of the Kingdom, Aonuma said, well, that would be a sequel to a sequel, which is getting a little bit wild when you think about it. But as I've mentioned previously, with Tears of the Kingdom, we were seeking to build on top of the world we created with Breath of the Wild, and really exhaust the possibilities of what we could put into that world. I think it is, to use a bit of a term, an apotheosis, or the final form of that version of The Legend of Zelda. In that regard, I don't think that we'll be making a direct sequel to a world such as that we've created. Additionally, technical director Takuhiro Dota, who has been a programmer at Nintendo for over 20 years, mentioned something that stuck out to me in an Ask the Developer interview at Nintendo. I was thinking that if we had created the game from scratch in a completely different world, we might have ended up with something with a similar gameplay feel to the last one, just with a different map. This is extremely important to consider as Zelda moves forward. While the comment was made in reference to Tears' focus on expanding Breath of the Wild as much as possible, this could also be used in reference to whatever comes next. Breath of the Wild's non-linearity was just the groundwork. In my opinion, what's next is to transform the structure and the systems, because otherwise, we'd get something similar with a different map, just as he said. Personally, I think the calculated design and structure of previous games can absolutely return in a non-linear setting. It's just about figuring out how to accomplish this. The rental system in A Link Between Worlds was a start, but it did water down the potential in dungeon design because you could enter dungeons with the item in question already in tow. In my opinion, they need to think of a structure that makes their open world feel like an uphill battle, as you fight to uncover the game's central dungeons, find the game's major items, and become stronger. The problem with these games is that progression has to be dictated not by finding your runes or Zonai abilities gradually, but by discovering what you can do with them as you go. And while Tears found an elegant solution by having the player constantly learn new things and build their own creative potential, it is so open-ended that players can break the game in half pretty much as soon as they have the devices, knowledge, and resources to do so. Both games have non-linearity embedded so deeply into their design that at no point will you see a cracked wall and think, well, I don't have bombs yet, so I'll have to leave that for later. This is also partially why some people feel overwhelmed by this new focus. You can do literally anything at any given time, rather than the game being designed like previous Zeldas, wherein you memorize suspicious locations and come back later when you have a new way of approaching the world. Instead, what is in place is a series of loops driven by flexible systems, such as durability, shrines, materials, armor, and more, and these loops are strong enough to carry players throughout the entire game for sure, but they are not at all a substitute for Zelda's previous sense of progression. Feedback loops are what games are built on. You perform well, you are rewarded for it, and you use those rewards to continue to perform better and better. The sense of progression Zelda carried with it since inception is inherently one of those loops. The loops in place in Breath and Tears, those concurrent systems I mentioned, have become a reliable way of governing such massive games, and I've gone on at length about how they are creative and satisfying reinventions of typical genre systems, and how it pushes me to further engage with the world. But now that I've completed multiple playthroughs of Breath of the Wild and my third playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom, I'd like to see something completely different for a change. As I've argued, these systems do not carry as much longevity. I think the next Zelda should consider what a non-linear open-world game would look like if it wasn't being governed by all of these systems dictating your exploration. I have to wonder if they could create something more focused on individual solid gameplay systems that aren't about collecting, scavenging, and upgrading, yet still with the sense of scale and wonder that these newer Zeldas tended to evoke. It might sound like a compromise, but it just might enable the construction of an entirely new kind of Zelda, born from the desires that founded Breath of the Wild to begin with. Let Breath of the Wild's chemistry between all elements and its survivalism and discovery, as well as Tears of the Kingdom's player-driven creativity, be their own individual experiences, and keep moving forward. Ironically, continuing to pursue full non-linearity comes with its own limitations on how you can build a satisfying sense of progression, which is why these two games banked so heavily on micromanagement of multiple systems. But even if they don't want to budge on non-linearity, which is likely, I still believe they can find a middle ground. First of all, they need to ditch the notion that players should be able to do literally anything at any given time. If they see a bombable wall before they have bombs, or a hookshot route that they cannot take, allow players to take note of it and return later when they have the necessary items. There's no reason the idea of leaving tasks for later should be taboo. This would also avoid the overwhelming feeling of being pulled in several different directions that I loved at first, but became exhausted from after Tears doubled down on that feeling. Now, speaking of dungeon items, let's say you are allowed to complete dungeons in any order, and each dungeon gives you its dungeon item after you wander through it and solve it for a bit. With that dungeon item, you then have free reign to tackle the puzzles just as you would in a dungeon from either Breath or Tears, but tying it all together is a central mechanic unique to each dungeon. sort of like the Lightning Temple's mirrors opening all paths throughout, or the ways in which all of your paths are connected through the central mechanism in the Champion's Ballads additional dungeon, and perhaps the only way of interacting with it is through that dungeon's item. While this would build on what Tears of the Kingdom accomplished in some of its dungeon design, I also think they can pursue player freedom uniquely this way, and it allows each player's path through the game and experiences clearing each dungeon to be totally different. Maybe they use the hook shot they obtained in one dungeon on a wooden surface to find an emergent solution to a problem in another dungeon, for example. This would also make pursuing each dungeon an exciting prospect as you wonder how you can use and combine each item. Not to mention, the game becomes incredibly replayable as you find different item routes and optimize your own personal journey through the game. Also, maybe these items could be used and combined across the game to complete quests for new weapons for Link. And maybe all of your items could be used toward the end of the game to obtain an equivalent to the Fierce Deity Mask or Big Goron Sword. And hey, what if dungeons were designed as they were in previous games, just with more freedom to experiment with obtaining its keys and working your way through? It would be difficult to build such dungeons, but Echoes of Wisdom gave us a glimpse into Zelda having its cake and eating it too. While having universally applicable tools in a non-linear game such as the runes and Zonai devices is always going to be a remarkable feat of game design, I feel like giving typical dungeon items versatility outside of just their primary intended uses, but not making them so versatile that they exist throughout the entire game, will always be my preferred way to design a Zelda game. The gradual lifting of limitations is so inarguably satisfying, and it's actually what made this game so fun for me to play through the first time around. Keep in mind, these items I've suggested are just based on existing ones. They could take what I've said and design all new, insanely fun and flexible items that apply well to an open-ended game. I'm sure the Zelda team would, as they always do. I don't know, I'm just spitballing. I couldn't possibly work out how these ideas would function in practice unless I was directly involved in the game's development. But all I really want is for people to be able to reconnect with Zelda without betraying the team's desire to go in a new direction. You know what's funny? If the next Zelda game does indeed impose limitations once again, the Zelda cycle will run its course, and tons of people will regard Tears of the Kingdom as a masterpiece that the team will never be able to surpass. Or that will happen anyway. Mark my words. As Aonuma said in an interview, we as people have a tendency to want the thing that we don't currently have. I feel Tears of the Kingdom's issues are much grander and more noticeable than merely spawning from a desire for the previous game, and I've gone into more than enough detail on them, but the Zelda cycle is still a very real thing. With everything that I've said though, I still love this game. For every shrine that has me do something I already know how to do, or allows me to break it in half, there is another shrine that is genuinely awesome, like the ones I mentioned earlier in this video, and embodies what the team has accomplished. For every moment I've found exploring and mining the depths to be dull, there have also been moments where the depths prove to be an extremely compelling parallel to the surface. For every Sky Island that feels like a retread of another island, there's a Sky Island that I fell in love with. For every lifeless or disappointing reuse of Breath of the Wild's Hyrule, another reuse could be profound, memorable, nostalgic, transformative, or even emotional. For every cave that feels similar to another, there is a cave that is inventive and fun to explore and solve, and contains a unique challenge or utilization of the environment that I didn't see coming. Like the caves that have you sail in or find a hole in a mountain, or sink through quicksand, or dive in from the sky, or some other incredible demonstration of what is possible in this game. For as much as I lament its less impactful gameplay loops, there are times where its loops are so compelling that I can't help but get lost in everything going on. For every moment I've been disappointed in a dungeon's decisions, there have been other moments in dungeon design that display genuine creativity and reinvention of what a Zelda dungeon can be, all driven by this game's core mechanics being interconnected and open-ended, and allowing me to glimpse a bright future for Zelda. Just because I say the game is inconsistent in its reuse of Breath of the Wild's conventions and setting, inconsistent does not mean bad. Inconsistent means the quality fluctuates, and when everything in this game comes together, as it often does, it is a wonderful experience. That's why for everything I've said, I don't reflect on this game with disappointment. I remember it for the absolutely insane things I've been able to achieve in it. I remember it for the moments I was able to interact with those that rebuilt and reconnected Hyrule, and see how they were dealing with the upheaval, or investigating Zelda's disappearance in their own ways. I remember it for those special moments like when I reached the Wind Temple for the first time, or sent a Korok tumbling down a mountain to reach his friend, or landed on Master Koga's flying machine and caught him by surprise. Or I tried to build a weapon of mass destruction to fight Gleeok and got disassembled and humbled. I don't know, man. In spite of everything I've said, this game is still one of the coolest things I have ever played. It might not be my favorite Zelda game or anything, but there still really isn't anything else like it. Except Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts to give that game credit for something. Tears of the Kingdom had this remarkable ability to make such a long wait through a desolate period in human history feel worthwhile, because I had so much fun with it when all was said and done. I know that might ring hollow for some of you, and I get that. I understand where you're coming from if this chapter didn't make that apparent. Everything I've said about this game is only in the interest of wanting Zelda to be the best that it can be, but I think the fact that all of these elements present such a nuanced discussion is precisely why Zelda is already so special. And that includes this game. In truth, Zelda is such a malleable game series with such distinct entries each time that everyone's tastes will be completely different, but no single person will be alone in how they feel. I know now from the various conversations I've had with people, not just about Tears of the Kingdom, but about this video you're watching right now, and about everything that has ever troubled me in life, that I am never alone in anything that I am feeling. If you feel alone, I promise you that you are not. Which brings me to this video's final chapter. In Breath of the Wild, I considered Tarrytown a vehicle for the game's message. A man who breaks off from his construction group and builds his own town from the ground up, recruits a slew of people all looking for a fresh start, leading to the town's theme encompassing every major town across Hyrule, and the desires to begin anew. And he even meets someone, falls in love, and gets married, proving that even in such a desolate world, life goes on. In Tears of the Kingdom, Tarrytown once again proves itself to be that self-contained story that embodies everything this game stands for. The quest is simple. It doesn't span every region in Hyrule like the previous game. Rather, it is just about a father who is finding it difficult to let his only child find independence. Upon entering Tarrytown, at least from the main entrance, it might feel as though it hasn't changed a whole lot in the time since Breath of the Wild. Faison still has one of the best shops in the game, and all of the houses are where they should be. But you'll quickly notice the differences as you explore and talk to people. Pelisson now allows you to separate fuse materials from your weapons. Colton's brother Kilton is aiming to spread his love of monsters by creating statues out of photographs, meaning I can turn this hilarious photo into an unforgettable masterpiece. And there is now a gondola that takes you to the sandbox that is the Hudson construction site. You can build and assemble pretty much anything you like here, and take it for a spin on the test track. There's even a quest that encourages you to do so and directly leads into Lurelyn's water rally. The biggest revelation, however, is the fact that Hudson Construction is apparently capable of enabling you to assemble your own dream home, fitting each room together however you see fit, purchasing rooms as you go, and making it your one and only stop for anything you might need, all assembled with the blocks that make up Hudson's buildings. I've heard a rumor that the team wanted players to be able to assemble such a house in Breath of the Wild, but they instead allowed players to construct and upgrade a fixed home in Hiteno. With Ultra Hand, this dream became a reality, and it is without a doubt one of the coolest methods of personalization and expression in this game, and one that I had no qualms with pouring my rupees into. Here's the quaint little abode I built for this video. I've got a place to trade in my blessings, a pond outside, a triangular setup for my rooms where I display my swords and shields, a bed, and across from my bed, a beautiful photo of Isha. Oh, god damn it. Yeah, I guess it'd make sense that I'd eventually attach a room upside down. Unfortunately, before you can purchase the land and build your house, you'll have to find out why Hudson and Ronson already have their hands full. As it turns out, both of them are preparing for their daughter's big move to Gerudo Town due to the tribe's customs. Their daughter, Madison, has reached an age where she is starting to become more aware of the world around her, so someone from Gerudo Town is coming to pick her up. Madison is excited to gain independence and study and live with the Gerudo, and Ronson is doing everything she can to prepare for the move, but Hudson is finding it difficult to be strong and give her a proper send-off. All he really wants is to spend a little time with her before she has to leave. There's not really a lot to do in this quest, it's quite simple. First, all you have to do is allow Madison to brush up on the Gerudo language. Or, answer her questions yourself. Then she'll want to go down to visit her dad in the construction site, but the guy sitting in front of the gondola won't let her go unless she pays him. This is the same guy that tries to pawn off a shrine crystal, by the way. What an asshole. The solution is to obscure his view somehow, and there are probably a few ways to do this, but the intended way is to borrow one of Hudson's cutouts of himself. You can do this by finding a way to unblock the door here, which can be done by finding Tarrytown Tunnel, and then ascending in just the right spot. Then you block his view and allow you and Madison to sneak off to the construction site. It's so funny that the game just makes you accept that he couldn't possibly step around the cutout of Hudson. It's like he's welded to that spot forever, and if his field of view is blocked, he is simply screwed. The final portion of the quest reveals that Hudson has made a hot air balloon for Madison, to which Madison remarks that she loves it, and that it looks like the sun. Hudson decides that he wants to dye the balloon yellow, like the sun, and after all is said and done, Hudson will have worked through the night to make sure that this balloon is perfect. At the crack of dawn, Madison's escort to Gerudo Town will have arrived, so as they all get ready to watch the sunrise and bless Madison's journey from their sun balloon, Hudson invites Link to join them after everything he's done for them. Ronson says to Madison, "Whether you're in Gerudo Town or Tarrytown, never forget that we are all standing beneath the very same sun. The only distance that matters is the distance between our hearts. So you see, your mama will always be beside you." Hudson puts on a brave face as he sees his daughter off, and that sun-like balloon ends up being a wonderful symbol and reminder of the very thing that unites their family, even while apart. Not only did the sun remind me of the time I saw the same sun and reflected on it in my Breath of the Wild video, I found this to be an emotional representation of what I think Tears of the Kingdom is truly about. I want to reiterate the sense of togetherness and established infrastructure that Hyrule now has. From the Lucky Clover Gazette to Hiteno expanding and attracting actual tourism, to Lurelin doing the same after its restoration, through its water rally, to the many quests I outlined that demonstrate a sense of connection throughout Hyrule, you never feel like you're truly alone in this journey. Breath of the Wild was often a solitary journey for Link, as it asked him to restore his memory and save Zelda in a ruined Hyrule that had barely managed to scrounge together a sense of civilization. In this game, it can feel like that, but through the avatars of the sages, you never feel like you're on your own. As you reunite with the sages one after another, your strength increases in numbers as they assist you in battle. Even while apart, they are with you. And I can't help but feel like this notion, and in large part the game's story, was informed by experiences the team had developing this game remotely. During that time period, we as a species did everything we could to persevere. As social creatures, we craved interaction, and we found ways to make a time where that was difficult to accomplish more bearable. Honestly, it was a time where I realized how much I truly rely on the connections I've made to make getting through the hardships of life that much more tolerable. I don't know where I'd be without my friends. That's why I came to love this game's revisitation of the same Hyrule in the end. It both carried that sense of camaraderie that I felt when physically distanced from my friends through the sages' avatars, and it showed me a version of Hyrule that had rebuilt and reconnected. But let's think about this for a moment. After Link woke up in Breath of the Wild, it had been 100 years since the Great Calamity. In that time, life had gone on, but everyone was still very much splintered. Tears of the Kingdom's Hyrule has bounced back so significantly in that time, and yet, it hasn't been all that long. It's been long enough that Hudson and Ronson have had a kid, and that kid has grown to an age where she has to go stay in Gerudo Town, But it's not like it's been a century or anything. So how did Hyrule manage to advance this much when previously, it took them 100 years to get to where they were in Breath of the Wild? The answer to that is Princess Zelda. Nowhere is this sense of maintaining your connections with the people you care about more evident than in the search for her, and in observing her impact on Hyrule. I've already talked about how you can follow in her footsteps, and I've shown how others have been inspired by her, but the monument dedicated to the lost souls of the Calamity was only a small piece of just how much she has done for Hyrule. Under her supervision as the de facto leader of Hyrule, so to speak, she did not aim to rule, but to restore and help others live on. During this supervision, Zelda established a primary school in Hiteno Village so that the children there can be educated. Hudson Construction, as tasked by Zelda, expanded their efforts throughout Hyrule, as observed as soon as you land in Hyrule for the first time, and through the parts they contribute all over the place, and their efforts directly led to the construction of Lookout Landing. Enterprises such as Yunobo's mining company and the expansion of Hiteno Village are symbols of a proper, thriving economy, and Hyrule enjoyed an atmosphere of peace, at least prior to the gloom leaking out of Hyrule Castle. But Zelda took it upon herself to investigate that right away, despite the risk. This incarnation of Zelda has proved herself to be remarkably selfless, and she already made a huge sacrifice by sealing herself inside Hyrule Castle in the previous game, but it seems like everything she does now, she does for the prosperity of Hyrule. She loves this place. As I've outlined, you can find numerous reminders of Zelda's contributions to the world, and it serves to foster a deeper connection to her. Every time you see what looks to be her appear around Hyrule, it is a reminder of who all of this is for. That connection is especially evident if you decide to revisit Link's house in Hiteno Village. As soon as you set foot through the front door, you'll notice pictures of various things and people from around Hyrule. The picture of the champions that Link could get framed in Breath of the Wild's expansion pass remains, and Zelda's diary can be found on a desk near her bed. That's right, Zelda lived here before this game picked up. Rather than continue her new life as a monarch, she would rather live among the people she cares so deeply about. In her diary, she recounts that Hyrule was relentlessly damaged, but that the people had a strong will to rebuild, and Zelda resolved to protect them and do whatever she could to help. Most of what I said earlier about Zelda's efforts are recounted in this diary. She also mentions a secret room that she requested Hudson add to her house. This turns out to be the well in her front yard, where she goes to study when she needs to concentrate. Here she keeps a lot of books and research material, as well as drawings from the students of Hiteno's new school. It's cute, but what I love most is this secret diary she keeps. The very first entry is about Link remaining at her side. To pay his loyalty back, she puts an order in for a new and improved champion's tunic, and she hides it from him in the castle's throne room. Naturally, as soon as I found out about this, I ran straight to Hyrule Castle, solved the throne room puzzle, which wasn't much of a puzzle if you found this clue to be fair, and earned myself the champion's leathers. Alternatively, the fact that you can find this without the clue, and then learn about the intentions behind it, makes it a really sweet moment. Additionally, Link's old hairband can be found in a treasure chest just next to her desk. Not to mention, the way Zelda talks about Link in that one memory with Rauru and Sonia, and the way she smiles when talking about him. From all of this, it is abundantly clear that Link's loyalty for Zelda has not gone unnoticed by her. She appreciates having him by her side through everything she has had to confront. So where is she? When can he see her again? Some of the Tears of the Dragon hint at draconification. They warn against swallowing a secret stone, and Mineru says to become an immortal dragon is to lose oneself. After Rauru sacrifices himself to seal Ganondorf away, and Zelda receives the Master Sword in the past, Zelda suggests that she might be the one that needs to restore the Blade of Evil's Bane, herself, over thousands of years, as an immortal dragon. That's the reason this story's use of time travel is more interesting than those that focus on avoiding paradoxes to me. It feels as though these characters are forced to play a part in an unchanging series of events, and rather than attempt to prevent them, the story instead focuses on how the characters might feel about them and the sacrifices they have to make. Much like Skyward Sword, it is a story that sheds light on the notion of fate versus free will. Restoring the blade was something that needed to occur in order for the kingdom she loved to be saved in the present day. And because these events were fated to occur, Zelda does so. It works, however, because I absolutely believe Zelda would make this sacrifice. After what she did in Breath of the Wild and the restoration efforts she led in this game, I have no doubt that Zelda would be willing to do anything to protect this world. Even if it meant making the ultimate sacrifice to lose her sense of self for the rest of time. And because this is Zelda, this sacrifice is painful. In most of the initial trailers for this game, an Arhu can be heard playing Zelda's lullaby. Although the significance of this instrument might not be apparent immediately, I made the connection as I watched Zelda become the light dragon and fly away. The other dragons, Naedra, Farosh, and Dinral, all had an Arhu in their theme, when you'd approach them in both games. The clues were in front of me all along. This sacrifice was fated to occur, and as it turns out, Zelda was always there, watching over Link in some way. Even though we are apart, we exist under the very same sun. I was never alone, even when it may have felt as though I was. It's just that Zelda, as she is now, is not conscious of who she was and will not ever respond as she once did. But it is, in some way, still her. A bittersweet revelation. The conclusion of this quest leaves you in a bed of silent princesses, and you can see a golden light emanating from the light dragon's head. Yeah, remember what I said about this spiral island not being utilized as well as before? Suddenly, I don't feel that way anymore. As I stood here and collected these flowers, I was suddenly struck by how wistful and tragic the music accompanying the geoglyphs were, and I began to respect how compelling the hunt for these tears actually was. With every geoglyph representing a moment in Hyrule's history, all I could do was collect the pieces of that history and lament everything that took place with no control over its events. It was here where I knew that I would remember this game's story not for the lack of meaningful context surrounding that early Hyrule, but for Princess Zelda's ultimate sacrifice in the past, and how her sacrifices continue to impact the present day. My only question from here was, now what? I attempted to follow that light, only to realize just how close you could get to the dragons this time. In the previous game you'd be knocked away, but you can pretty much fly alongside them now. And to my utter shock, you can actually stand on the dragons as well. The dragons all have their own shards to collect here, but the light dragons specifically heal you whenever you fuse them to a weapon, and they have a decent attack value as well, so I enjoyed using them. But that's not why I bring this up. I landed on Zelda's back to check out the strange light coming from her head. And lo and behold, the Blade of Evil's Bane was resting there, waiting to be pulled. Naturally, this is exactly what I did. It takes stamina to pull this time, as you have to hang on for dear life, as poor Zelda resists in her draconified state. But if you have enough, you will be taken to a place bathed in golden light. The same light that I feel unites everyone in Hyrule. And you remove the now restored Master Sword from Zelda's head. The only thing I could think to say in response to both this moment and her sacrifice was simply, "Thank you, Zelda." I realize now that when I said this in my first playthrough, it had two meanings. I was both thanking Zelda for her selfless actions that placed her in an immortal, unending state of limbo as a dragon. And I was thanking the Zelda series for this deeply profound iteration on one of the most important sequences in these games. From now on, whenever I saw the light dragon flying in the sky, I was reminded of what Zelda meant to me, and I was reminded that I was not alone. The Master Sword functions just how it did in Breath of the Wild, but thanks to Fuse, you can take advantage of its decent base attack value and its ability to come back after a certain period of time to use it for whatever purpose you see fit. It can be a powerful weapon in defeating the game's toughest enemies and bosses, it can be used to mine ore, it can be used as a base for some wild experiments, it's all entirely up to you. And I found myself using it equally in combat and in gathering materials when compared to how I used it in the previous game. Much like many elements in Tears of the Kingdom, they've doubled down on how the Master Sword is used, and it directly connects to a central mechanic for something delightfully transformative. To that end, Zelda's existence as the Light Dragon has some huge effects on the game's story, gameplay, and world moving forward. Much like the materials that the other dragons drop, you can use the Light Dragon's scales and shards to upgrade your champion's leathers, which means that anytime I ever saw her flying around out there, I made a beeline for her in order to improve one of the best pieces of armor in the game. The Light Dragon functions a bit differently than the other dragons in practice, though. Rather than following a set path according to in-game time, the Light Dragon actually moves in real time, making her path a lot more difficult to chart. That said, her materials recharge every 10 minutes, so anytime that I was up here with her, I would collect what I'd need, and then just sit here and be with her while I waited. Maybe it was because I was recording for this video, but I didn't mind waiting here with her. I guess I just really wanted to spend time with Zelda now that I knew where she was all along. I even left her a present as a thank you. More importantly though, depending on when you discover that Zelda is the Light Dragon, it can create a palpable atmosphere of ludonarrative dissonance. If you still have a couple of dungeons left to complete, or if you're still working on the breadcrumb trail left across the Lucky Clover Gazette, you'll still be following the trail of a Zelda that you know is very obviously fake. Not to mention, Link never tells anyone that Zelda is a dragon other than Impa, and Purah only learns about this much later. The game attempts to maintain an atmosphere of mystery surrounding Zelda's scattered appearances, but you know the truth. You know this is just Ganondorf being evil and engaging in a mild amount of tomfoolery. It did lead to a pretty awesome revisit to Hyrule Castle and a confrontation with Phantom Ganon alongside your pals, but for many, all of this detracted from such a heart-wrenching reveal simply because the game didn't like that you found out where Zelda was before the rest of the story could be told. In a game that is designed to be non-linear, mind you, just as its predecessor was. It's a similar problem to the memories being out of order in this game. But I bring this up now because I simply never cared. I never identified this as ludonarrative dissonance, as I actually found the fact that Link kept this revelation about Zelda's whereabouts to himself quite endearing. Perhaps this was not only to prevent that information from falling into the wrong hands, but also as an extension of the bond he and Zelda share. Does this sound absolutely stupid and selfish? Yeah, and that's why I love it. Finding Zelda is the mystery that Tears of the Kingdom's story is predicated on. Not just because the forces of good are looking for her, but the forces of evil are as well. Therefore, when her whereabouts are actually revealed to Link, he deliberately does not tell anyone where she is, at least for a while, because if the secret stays with him, it cannot travel anywhere else. No one can surrender that information if they are interrogated, or betray Hyrule for one reason or another. It will die with him, should it come to that. Why? Because he cares about Zelda more than anyone else in his life. Doesn't it make sense that he would want to protect her, even if withholding that information from people he should be able to trust is selfish? Link's characterization in these games at a glance might not appear to be explored thoroughly. In the English version, he is treated as an avatar for the player, with his only real backstory being that he is Zelda's appointed knight, and one of the champions that fought back against the Calamity. Hyrule Warriors explores his idiosyncrasies and personality a bit more, but not enough for him to step outside of that avatar designation. Zelda's diary entries were the most we got in terms of understanding who Link is. If you played this game in Japanese, however, and you know the language, You might notice the quest log entries sometimes use the pronoun jibun, which is usually used when referring to yourself in first person. In English, they are written as though they are talking to you, the player, but in Japanese, they are essentially a diary for Link, and this extends beyond just a change in a pronoun. Without giving him a speaking role so as to continue to solidify the unification of him and the player, the game still found an incredible way to portray his own personality. You'll notice that the quest logs reveal so much about Link's personality, including compassion for Hudson and Ronson, gluttony as later depicted in Age of Calamity, and as Zelda wrote about in her diary in the castle, empathy as demonstrated through numerous quests, and playfulness, not just through his fondness for certain minigames, but he even jokingly writes one log entry like a Goron, ending every sentence with Goro. Goro was an element omitted from the English version of Breath of the Wild, but thankfully it came through in Tears of the Kingdom. If you played with Japanese voices in the previous game, you probably would have noticed that with Yunobo already. All of this is being cited from an old blog post by Yadnal, and you can read up on the script differences there, which I highly recommend. The reason I bring it up at all is because of one absolutely crucial log entry that further proves his connection to Zelda is something truly special. It is undeniable that the two of them are quite close. Link was the only person Zelda could trust with everything she'd been dealing with as the Princess of Hyrule, and her failings in attempting to awaken her power. And after Link collects all of the memories in Breath of the Wild, the Japanese log entry can be translated as such. I finished visiting all 13 of the locations in the old pictures. I remembered everything I've been through together with Princess Zelda. In those memories of mine, Princess Zelda always strived to complete the task burdened onto her. Even if it's just a moment sooner, I want to save her as quickly as possible. I want to see her smile again, with my own eyes. This is why I hold so much emotional reverence for this lull between Link finding out about Zelda being the dragon, and actually informing people about it. My mind fills in the gaps. He is protective of her and doesn't want anyone to know until it is absolutely necessary to tell them. And I can relate to that. Sure, the people that eventually learn this secret are probably never going to surrender it to anyone, and I concede that this might not have been the intent of the developers. I've already acknowledged that. As I mentioned, you can even tell Impa pretty quickly after you discover this. But intent is not the only way a game or any other work of art lives. How a game is perceived is equally as important, if not more so. It can inform an artist's next work and leave an impact far beyond what they could have ever anticipated or intended. In fact, if the English localization of Breath of the Wild is anything to go by, intent can often be misconstrued or deliberately disregarded. As Link and Zelda are quite close in this game, beyond him just being her appointed knight, the notion that Link would keep this secret as close to his chest as possible is a mark of his devotion to and sworn protection over Zelda. Fittingly, these translation discrepancies actually continued into Tears of the Kingdom, and it sheds light on another thing that Link feels in response to this revelation. I visited all the geoglyphs and witnessed all the dragon tears. In order to entrust me with the Master Sword, Princess Zelda sacrificed herself to transform into the White Dragon. I must do whatever it takes to live up to her wishes. When Link realizes that Zelda is the dragon, he looks upon the Garden of Silent Princesses before him and displays an expression that I don't think I've ever seen from him. It's subtle, but just enough that the weight he feels is conveyed. It's this subtlety and room for interpretation that I don't think gets enough credit in this game. Some have commented on the fact that only specific characters remember Link, while others, strangely, do not. Personally, I find that believable. Link was established by Zelda in Breath of the Wild to not be the talkative sort, contextualizing his silence. He would rather bear any burden without saying a word. Unless the characters in question have some connection to important figures that know Link personally, or the characters spent a long time with Link in the previous game, why would they remember him? Link is not at all the type to gloat about his accomplishments to everyone he meets. He doesn't announce who he is when he meets someone in Breath of the Wild. He wouldn't have gathered a worldwide press conference declaring that he was the one who saved Hyrule. Years later, when Link returns and revisits these people, Their only interaction with him would have been that he briefly helped them or spoke with them. I believe this Link would remain reserved and would aim to live a normal life to some extent during Hyrule's time of peace. This, coupled with what I said about Link keeping Zelda's identity to himself, make for a journey that feels deeply personal to him. And this ties into why I feel the appearances of Zelda have been misconstrued by most players. To me, the repetitive plot structure of following the trail of a clearly fake Zelda is not the point of these quests. I knew it wasn't going to be her after only a couple of sightings. I legitimately do not think that the Zelda team would create this disconnect while you unravel a dead-end mystery without realizing it. While I disagree with the repetitive aspects of it, and I understand why some perceive it as a disconnect, the purpose of these quests that involve sightings of Zelda is not to have you find her, but to reconnect with friends and observe a changed Hyrule. When I think of the regional phenomena, I don't immediately think of the times I saw Zelda and clearly knew it wasn't her. I think of Tulin learning to work with others. I think of Riju becoming a strong leader. I think of Yunobo leading a mining company and rolling into everything. I think of Sidon's optimism. I think of Pen leading me toward a caged Princess Zelda that happened to be a Yiga clan member. I think of the talking Kuko in Akala, or the stable trotters, or Zelda's golden horse, or that time a group of people thought that Zelda asked them to charge into a cave in their underwear. This wild goose chase led to me enjoying this continued depiction of an existing Hyrule more than I ever thought I could. Reconnecting with familiar characters, meeting new ones, tackling goofy tasks. If this is where such a fruitless endeavor led me, then I can say it was well worth it. I got to see the Hyrule that Zelda fostered and connected. I got to connect with these people firsthand, and it only made me lament her draconification even more. If only she were herself again, if only to see how these people have prospered. Together. Which is why I was beyond determined to slay the person who created this whole situation to begin with. After I felt ready, I dove below Hyrule Castle, fought and crafted my way through countless rooms, slew a Lionel, and reached the darkest depths of Hyrule, where the Demon King's army was waiting for me. At one point in your journey through these depths, the sage's avatars will fail to reach you, and you'll be on your own. It feels isolating and hopeless, until your comrades join you once again in the fight against the army, except it's not just their avatars, they are really physically here to help, so long as you've completed their temples. Such an empowering moment in delivering that feeling of connection and togetherness. Once all of the monsters are slain, all that is left to do is confront Ganondorf himself. If you've fought Phantom Ganon, you may have a clue as to how these battles will play out, but Ganondorf can still perfect dodge and flurry rush you, and he still has plenty of tricks up his sleeve. It is a one-on-one confrontation that brings the general flow of combat across both games to the forefront. It's not as intimate as, say, the fight with Demise is due to the nature of that game's combat, but it more than makes up for that with the second phase. Ganondorf was merely toying with Link in that first fight, as a warm-up to experience the thrill of battle after countless years of waiting. He awakens his true power thanks to the secret stone in his forehead, and his health bar just keeps going. God, what a fantastic moment this is. While Ganondorf sticks to the same moves now, he summons several phantoms to overwhelm you, all mirroring his movements. With the amount of health he has, it seems like an impossible task to defeat him. But your friends emerge one by one to lend a helping hand, further selling the cooperation that drives this story at its core. After gradually whittling his health down, Ganondorf will knock your pals away and unleash everything he's been holding back. Gloom will swarm as he attacks, and each connecting hit won't just inflict gloom damage, but they will also remove heart containers, as if demanding that you explore and prepare as thoroughly as possible for this moment, since his attacks gradually strangle you and decrease your room for error. But eventually, it all comes together. Funnily enough, I fought Ganondorf traditionally because it just felt right to me, but you are free to use Ultra Hand here to defeat him however you like, provided that you can stay on top of his attacks all the while. The boss is an all-encompassing test that the player is free to approach however they like, even if it is not advertised as such. Which is when I feel this game is at its best regardless. In the final phase, Ganondorf rips the secret stone out of his forehead and swallows it in the name of attaining the ultimate power, essentially spitting on the sacrifice Zelda made. The gloom-laden form he takes on at first eerily resembles Calamity Ganon, but eventually, he becomes the Demon Dragon. Link finds himself stuck between the dragon's teeth, unable to free himself. In a final move to solidify this game's focus on connecting with others, the deepest connection Link ever had returns to free him from Ganondorf's grasp. You don't have to do this alone. Much like the final phase of Calamity Ganon, this final phase is about spectacle and figuring out what to do more than it is about the game's combat and central mechanics and systems. It does, however, allow you to come close to that golden light I love so dearly as it lights up the horizon and you fight entirely in the sky, in cooperation with Zelda, to gradually stab each of Ganondorf's weak points. The boss theme combines the main theme of the game, the Erhu that symbolizes the dragons, and Ganondorf's theme, in an ever-exciting dance of dragons that you play a crucial part in, but you feel so small compared to these colossal creatures. The sky grows dark as you get closer and closer to your goal, but eventually, you'll shatter that secret stone, and Ganondorf, the demon dragon, will erupt into a blinding ray of light and eventually dissolve into nothingness. It is an incredible feeling, but I would not have been able to do it without the people I care about backing me up, which lovingly encompasses what this game is truly about. Rauru and Sonia put the last of their power, which resides in Link's arm, into restoring Zelda and Link to normal, before joining hands and fading into the beyond. Perhaps this could have been explained or justified in another way, and maybe a bittersweet ending where Zelda remains a dragon would have made for a more poignant ending, but to mention a show I love dearly once more, Avatar: The Last Airbender ended with a Deus Ex Machina through the Lion Turtle. But the ending proved to not be about that sudden emergence of a solution to Aang's dilemma, but through the message that the corrupting forces of nefarious power, though overwhelming, should be resisted in favor of an amicable and ultimately peaceful resolution. A lot of this game's story has Link and Zelda take part in a series of events that were ultimately fated to occur, as foretold underneath Hyrule Castle. I always felt that Link's arm was a part of that, as though this outcome was predestined, should he succeed. You can agree or disagree with this decision, but I couldn't imagine this game ending any other way other than taking Zelda's hand. With how Zelda gives Link recall at the beginning of the game as a symbol of her power as the Sage of Time, and with how often this occurs throughout the game as a symbol of reconnecting with others and feeling that they will always be with you. After waiting all this time to see the person that Link cared most about, to be able to physically be with her again, after she sacrificed so much for Hyrule, for him, and to be able to take her hand again, I was going to repay her for everything she'd done for me, and for the rest of Hyrule. As Link, I was going to do what I'd always done. Protect Princess Zelda. Link holds Zelda as they land in the same pond that Link dives into at the beginning of the game. And Zelda says this. I had been sleeping all this time, but when I felt something like a warm, loving embrace, I woke up. This is exactly how I felt coming out of that bleak, never-ending period of isolation and uncertainty. The days blended together as though it were a long dream that I couldn't wake up from. But when it was finally over, when I was able to hug the people closest to me, I knew that I had woken up. And it wasn't just the people that I was looking forward to seeing. I was looking forward to playing this game. Much like Link, I was looking forward to reconnecting with Zelda. Reconnecting with Zelda is a double entendre. Its first meaning is obvious considering what I just talked about, but my main goal with this video was to convey my appreciation for the game and understand the frustrations of those that don't really like it. In the end, I want all of this to come together with a message of hope for the future of Zelda. Every single game feels like a distinct entry, while also being a stepping stone in the never-ending goal of creating the perfect, ideal Legend of Zelda. All I wanted to do with this video, and with all of my Zelda videos, is to allow those that may have drifted away from Zelda to reconnect. As someone who adores each entry in the series for one reason or another, all I can ask is that both fans of Zelda and the developers think about what I've written in such a way that they can reconnect with what it means to be Zelda. What is Zelda? That is a question that has a different answer depending on who you ask, and even if two people share the same answer, their opinions on how that definition is applied to each game can still differ. I've been writing about Zelda for a long time now, and I've cared deeply about this series for even longer, as long as I can remember, really. And I have no doubt in my mind that Zelda is about discovery. Whether that means discovering a new region to explore, discovering a cave with your bombs, discovering a new island in the Great Sea, discovering what can be done when you obtain a new item in a dungeon, discovering the themes that are tied to stories and characters you remember fondly, or discovering how you can assemble the perfect mischievous device with Ultra Hand. All of these games are in tune with what it means to be Zelda. It's just that in the current era, Zelda is rediscovering itself. And my hope is that for everything that has been said about the era of the wild as it has become known, that it leads to a continued, prosperous, and transformative era that not only leaves an impact as these games did, but it allows those that have grown disillusioned to, in some way, reconnect with Zelda. Somehow, in some way, when I write about these games, I feel a little less alone. Perhaps it's because they've been able to reach more people than I ever could have imagined. Perhaps it's because the sentiments and themes these games carry echo a lot of the things I think about, but don't articulate. Perhaps it's because they create worlds that feel alive, with characters that seem to embody each game's message in one way or another. People trying to get by in a devastated land, people trying to forge their own paths, people trying to cope with impending doom. It feels as though the hopes, fears, and dreams of the people behind these games are being channeled into an expression of everything they feel. And I think that's why they've always been able to resonate with me. That and the prevailing wonder that Zelda was founded on is present in all of them. In Tears of the Kingdom, these hopes and fears were powerfully conveyed, especially as a lot of the game was developed remotely during a time where everyone was forced to isolate themselves. The game was created out of the desire to connect, not just in the ways Ultra Hand connects various concepts, but in the ways this game allows Link to connect with others. That's really what made this game work at the end of the day. No element exists in isolation. Nothing about it is alone. As much as the story is about connecting, the game is too, and they play into each other to dispel any feeling of isolation. Which is why, in the end, I can't help but love and appreciate this game for being that light at the end of the tunnel, and for reminding me that I am never alone. As I conclude this final Zelda retrospective, at least until the next major Zelda game years from now has had some time to marinate with people, all I can find myself able to muster is, well, it's just as I said in my first playthrough. Thank you, Zelda. Thank you for informing my perspectives on art and showing me the power of video games as a medium. Thank you for always instilling a sense of wonder and imagination that few games have been able to replicate, each and every time. Thank you for creating worlds that are always a delight to exist in, characters that will live on in my mind as I write for myself, and stories that each convey profound meditations on life, philosophy, and the notion of destiny. Thank you for the tangible impact you've had on me, for giving me one of the coolest jobs I could have ever asked for, and for continuing to inspire me in life and in art. Thank you to the people who have consistently brought these games to life. And thank you all for watching and caring just as much about Zelda as I do. Thank you, Zelda. I don't know where I'd be or who I'd be without you. I know that I'll still be making Zelda videos just on a smaller scale, and that this isn't goodbye forever. Zelda will always be with me, always a part of who I am and what I do. Special thanks to my friends Matt, Wolf, Bellomancer, Kohana, and my brother for their feedback and emotional support while I put this whole thing together. This video was exceptionally difficult for me to write, not just because I had to answer some pretty tough questions and adequately articulate some complicated feelings, but also because there was an intense finality to the whole thing. But hey, since you're watching this, I made it. I want to give a shout out to my longtime friend King K, who remains consistently supportive of me and is always willing to give me advice on what I'm working on. He has a show on Nebula right now called Masterful Mimicry, which dissects the deep-seated artistic influences in games like Okami and Hollow Knight Silksong. The Okami episode in particular highlights ancient Japanese techniques, something that is tied to Okami's gameplay not just in a mechanical sense, but as a meaningful way of connecting players with Japanese historical art, something ever-present throughout the game. If you're interested, you can check it out on Nebula, which is offering a 3-day free trial for new accounts, so you can familiarize yourself with what it has to offer. Nebula is a platform built on supporting creators. That's probably the most important thing to convey whenever I discuss Nebula in a video of mine. No matter if you decide to watch videos there before they release anywhere else, such as this one you're watching right now, by the way, or if you're interested in exclusive videos like Masterful Mimicry, or my complete-ish guide to making video game retrospectives, subscribing to Nebula and watching our videos on there directly supports us. Oh, and videos are ad-free. With my link, you can get 50% off of Nebula. During the month of December, it's just $30 a year, or $2.50 a month, at go.nebula.tv/Liam Triforce. So go check out Masterful Mimicry now, or whatever else might pique your interest. I've been Liam Triforce. Thank you all so much for watching.